Hello and welcome back to my channel. Make sure you like and subscribe to my channel. Let's begin. People were leaving the stadium discussing only one thing. Cynthia, the Pokémon Master, had been beaten. And not just beaten, but thrashed. Totally and ruthlessly crushed. Her opponent had used only one Pokémon. A Pokémon of raw power, that had been the only one that he had used as he destroyed trainer after trainer on his way to challenge Cynthia. Cynthia was crowned Pokémon Master 3 years previously and looked set to dominate the Pokémon leadership for a decade. Nobody had ever suspected that she would be humbled in such a fashion. And the worst part of it all for her. She had absolutely no idea who her successor was. The man stepped out of the door onto the street. He was tall, with black hair that wasn't long, but unruly. It was clear just by looking at him that he was not the kind of person to meet in a dark alley, with an imposing physique and the aura he seemed to exude. He wore black, boots, trousers and a shirt, with a jacket over the top. 6 Pokeballs were visible on a belt at his waist, and his face was covered by a hat which cast a slant hiding one of his eyes. In front of him was a ring of reporters and news crews, desperate for something from the new Pokémon Master. The man didn't say a word. He just strode through the middle, ignoring every question thrown at him. Sir, can you at least tell us your name?" called a desperate reporter, reaching for the figure as it passed him. As his hand touched the man's shoulder, those watching gasped in shock as the reporter was thrown backwards by an invisible force. He hit the street, and watched as the man kept walking without even breaking his stride. The reporters looked at each other in something close to awe. The new master was not a man to anger, it seemed. The man reached a black vehicle with tinted windows and the door opened by itself. He got in and the vehicle moved off. He felt nothing. He ran back through his battle, highlighting errors and working on improving them. He felt satisfied with his success, nothing more and nothing less. He felt his victory was no less than he deserved. As his car reached a tall set of imposing black gates, the gates opened, and the car drove onto a ramp which took it up to a bridge. The car traveled along the bridge for nearly 4 miles, heading out to sea until it reached an island. It drove off the end of the bridge, and through the forest until it stopped at the entrance to a large house. The door opened and the man stepped out, going to the door of the house which opened by itself. He strode through the house, and out the back, and for the first time that day a smile graced the features of Ash Ketchum as he looked over his Pokémon. There was not as many as might be expected from the new Pokémon Master. In addition to the 6 at his waist which he released, there was only 8 others. As he released the 6 Pokémon he was carrying into the gardens, he felt a head push against his hand and a soothing aroma come from his other side. 2 of his Pokémon had come up to him, and he looked at each of them before turning and going back inside. Meganium and Espeon looked at each other. A silent conversation passed between the two and they followed him into his house. They found Ash cooking food for the Pokémon, so Espeon curled up on a chair where she could watch from, and Meganium leaned against a side. As Ash completed his task he walked out of the house with 15 bowls following him. Each bowl was a different color according to the Pokémon whose food it contained. Each bowl set itself down near the Pokémon it was for, except for the 15th which set itself down in an area which was a short distance away from the rest of the Pokémon. This area had a small sleeping bag as well as a bottle of ketchup. Espeon, watching from her own food, mewed at her master who looked round at her. Ash watched his Pokémon with a certain degree of satisfaction. Although he hadn't used to be able to cook, he was now more than capable and could cook food that rivaled the best in terms of nutritious value to his Pokémon. Ash knew that the Pokémon with him were all he had, they fought for him, and him alone. He had proved his loyalty to each of them more times than any of them cared to count, and they had responded in kind. Once they had all finished eating they formed up in front of Ash. As soon as the last one reached him, Ash turned and started running. His Pokémon all kept up with few problems, as he had set off at a relatively slow pace. However, every minute the pace picked up until they were running faster than should have been possible for a human to sustain. After they had covered 20 miles in this fashion, achieving it in an hour, a staggering feat for a normal human but normal for this team, they had returned to the house. The team then headed for an area away from the house which turned out to be a gym. Each went to their allotted place, and began a workout regime. It took another hour for Ash to leave the weights he was using and turn to his Pokémon. He stated only one word. Pairs. Ash then turned away again and went to a spot just outside his house where he began to meditate whilst the Pokémon immediately paired up and began to battle. Every so often he was called to one of his Pokémon, giving them advice on how to improve. Eventually, their training regimen was over, and his Pokémon returned to their areas to rest. Ash walked into his house and sat on a sofa, but heard padding behind him. Espion had followed him in, and mewing softly she jumped up next to him, curling up. Relaxed as she looked, her mind was busy, reaching out to her master to talk to him, mewing softly at him when she felt his mind connect. Espion didn't think anything along the connection, and at first neither did Ash. Then he allowed his thoughts to flow. Espion sat there, accepting them, and not commenting. She felt his satisfaction at his achievement but also his regrets. More than anything, they both knew that this day was incomplete without his first Pokémon, his starter. Pikachu's absence weighed on Ash and by extension his team. Even those who had never met the electric mouse had heard about him from those who had, and they all wished he had been there. However, none of them knew the truth about his absence. None except the sun Pokémon curled up next to Ash. She had been the only one that Ash had confided in the aftermath of the event, before Ash began to turn truly cold. His compassion for his Pokémon never diminished, but towards the rest of the world he became cold. To his friends. They didn't even know he was alive. He hadn't contacted any of them for 7 years, he hadn't wanted to. After his defeat in Sinnoh he had left to train alone. As time passed, some of his Pokémon rebelled against his new mentality, they missed their more carefree life, and their carefree master. And whilst he still cared for them, both him and his Pokémon knew that the life he was now leading was not for everybody. They parted without anger, more the departure of friends. They returned to the wild, although many visited at times. In Ash's view this was the perfect outcome if they didn't want to stay. However, that view changed when Pikachu left. The Pokémon that wanted to leave had all done it very early in the training when they realized what their life was going to be like. It took 4 months for Pikachu to realize what he wanted, and he came to Ash. The rodent knew that he could be stronger than ever if he trained, but he didn't want to watch Ash lose himself. So he left, and in the aftermath Ash confronted his Pokémon, telling them that this was their last chance to leave if they didn't want to train with him anymore. There was an edge to his voice when speaking, and many of his Pokémon agreed that departure was their best option. Left with a mere 4 Pokémon, Ash spent the years rebuilding his team, and training them. He then returned to society and entered the World League, without giving his name. He had risen straight through the tournament and finally crushed Cynthia in the final. His victory granted him the rank of Pokémon Master, the title that he had long dreamed would be his. Finally it was. The next day Ash returned to the stadium where he met with the Mr. Goodshow. When asked what his name was, Ash merely stared. Having realized that if he persisted, little good was going to come of it, Mr. Goodshow proposed a compromise, where Ash's name wouldn't be public, but it needed to be known by the organizer of the Pokémon League. Ash's response was to slide a red box over the table. It opened and announced that it was the Pokédex of Ash Satoshi Ketchum. Ash then picked it up, took a folder which contained the information that he would need, and then strode out of the room, leaving a shocked Mr. Goodshow to watch the door swing shut behind him. At a later press announcement, it was announced that the new Pokémon Master did not wish to be named, and so would simply be called the Champion. He would not conduct interviews, but would be available to battle for the traditional month after the change of champion, which would begin immediately after his coronation, which was set for 3 days' time. Understandably, the media was unimpressed at the lack of information, but accepted it as what to expect with the mysterious man at the front of the Pokémon League. This was a reaction mirrored across the world as people watched, but were disappointed with what they received. That's ridiculous. How can he give nothing at all to them? Max, calm down. He's meant to be the face of the league, how can he? Max, shut up. Gary Oak had just about enough of Max's complaining. The younger trainer had been whining about the lack of information from the Champion, his new idol. Whilst he had received his training license some years previously, Max still idolized strong trainers, and anybody who could win any tournament with a single Pokémon, let alone the World Championship, was worth idolizing. However, that didn't give the youngster an excuse to keep on complaining. Though I wouldn't mind being taught by him, how do you think he got his Pokémon so strong? Brock chuckled as Gary looked at the ceiling, begging for the younger trainer to just shut up. They were sat in Professor Oak's laboratory, watching the announcement of the new master having all reunited there, like they had every year. Every year since the boy who joined them all together vanished. They met each year on the anniversary of the day that Pikachu reached Pallet Town, and was taken in by Delia Ketchum. Not a single one of Ash's other Pokémon ever returned, and Pallet Town's favorite son vanished off the radar. Now every year his friends all came and remembered him. It was the second year that Tracy pointed out that the World League came around the same time, and they all met to watch it. Gary had joined on the third year, and whilst Misty had complained that Gary had never been a friend of Ash's, Gary pointed out that he had known Ash for far longer than Misty, and had been the one who kept Pikachu in shape, training with him whenever he was in Pallet. As the years went on, they kept on coming back, and they began to enjoy the time together. It was now the third year that Drew had accompanied May to the reunion, as he had since they had started dating. Dawn had remained single and was considered to be the best coordinator around. May and Drew had competed for some years, but they had both slowly fallen away from contests, and more into just raising Pokémon. Misty had until recently remained as the Cerulean gym leader, but after becoming one of the most fearsome water Pokémon trainers around, she had preparing for a journey to qualify for the World League. Although she could have competed this year, she had wanted to train more, so had returned to the gym, although not taking it back over. Brock had become a Pokémon doctor and Tracy had become a researcher in his own right, though he stayed as an assistant, sometimes aiding Professor Oak, sometimes aiding Gary. Max was determined to be a trainer as strong as whoever his latest idol was, although whenever he was asked why he drove himself so hard he responded simply, Ash did. Professor Oak enjoyed the reunion every year, since he got to see any new Pokémon that any of them had captured, whilst Delia Ketchum was always saying how happy she was to look after Ash's family whilst she waited for him to come home. The final two people at the reunion were the ex-members of Team Rocket, Jessie and James, along with Meowth. They had tried to capture Pikachu 2 weeks after he returned to Pallet, but instead of fighting them, Pikachu had simply ignored them. Even after leaving Ash, Pikachu's strength was staggering and he had utterly destroyed the Pokémon sent against him. Since he didn't send them blasting off, they had asked what was wrong and, through Meowth, Pikachu explained that he felt his trainer was dead. Meowth had wanted to help a fellow Pokémon through such a loss, remembering when he was rejected by Meowsy, and Jessie and James agreed. They quit Team Rocket, and James began to train as a proper trainer whilst Jessie focused on fashion, although she still traveled with James. Pikachu had accompanied him for a year, and at the end of it they were accepted at the reunion. It was James who finally spoke up, in order to quieten Max before Gary acted on his contemplated murder. Professor Oak, who do you think it could be, to be so strong? I mean, how can somebody appear from nowhere that strong? Max instantly shut up and spun around to stare at the professor, who glared at James. I honestly have no idea who it might be, James, although I would be very interested in studying his Pokémon. I have never seen power which is even close to that. But Professor, Max started. Max, for the love of Arceus, shut up. Gary, Brock and Dawn shouted. The youngster was stunned into silence. Until, 5 seconds later. But he must have come from somewhere. James stood up. Max, I know you're excited, but honestly, we are all getting irritated with your talk about the champion. Please, can you take a break for a bit, perhaps do some training? Max was about to respond when he heard a call from Delia, dinner's ready. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the inauguration of the Pokémon Master. In keeping with the traditions, the new master, known only as the Champion, will accept a fight against any trainer that wishes to test themselves against him, for the first month of his reign. However, with his already stated intention to avoid the media, it is unknown if the Champion intends to make an inaugural address after he is crowned. The stadium was completely packed. This was an event that nobody wished to miss, the inauguration of a new Pokémon Master. Every gym leader and Elite Four member from Kanto, Johto, Sinnoh, Hoenn and Unova were present, as were many of the famous researchers from around the regions. Professor Oak had been invited and had gone, but the rest of the gang were left behind, sat around the TV at the Ketchum residence watching the event. As usual, Max was ranting about his new idol, although he had finally shut up when the TV commentator began to speak. In the middle of the stadium, Mr. Goodshow was just standing up, and gesturing for quiet throughout the stadium. As the crowd finally began to settle down and listen, Mr. Goodshow pulled out a microphone and began to speak. Welcome to all of you. We are here to confirm the appointment of a new Pokémon Master, after he won the title from his predecessor, Cynthia. And now, ladies and gentlemen, please welcome for the final time as Pokémon Master, the beautiful, Miss Cynthia Sharona. Applause erupted around the stadium, with the Sinnoh native being given a standing ovation. Whilst she was well known for her prowess in battle, Cynthia had become popular for her down-to-earth nature, and her willingness to help upcoming trainers. Many in the Pokémon world would miss her reign at the top, which had been far shorter than anybody had ever anticipated. As she reached Mr. Goodshow, she took the microphone, and turning to face the crowd, she waited for silence. Thank you. Her voice, level, refusing to let any weakness show. I am honored to have my departure treated in such a way. Throughout my reign as master, I tried to keep the league strong. 3 years ago, I promised you that I would aid the leaders across regions as well as any upcoming trainer. In that time, I would like to think I have honored my promises. Now, as my reign comes to an end, I retire in the knowledge that I did my best. Thank you for your support through the years, support that I hope you will extend to my successor. Cheers and applause rang out once again as Cynthia turned to Mr. Goodshow, who had managed to find another microphone from somewhere, and his voice rang out across the stadium. It is now my pleasure to introduce a man who went through the entire tournament known only as the trainer. When he first arrived, he refused to give his name, merely displaying the badges from all 4 regions, and requesting to enter the tournament. Now, at its end, he has emerged as not only the champion, but as one of the most powerful battlers I have ever seen fight. He has truly earned his rank, and the name he has been given reflects his ability. So, please put your hands together for legend among trainers, it's the new Pokémon Master, the champion. Ash strode out into the stadium. He was dressed in his usual black, his hat covering his face once again. He didn't acknowledge the crowd, but merely reached the center, rejecting the offer of a microphone. He knew that the crowd didn't love him like they loved Cynthia, yet they made nearly as much noise for him. As he turned to face the women he had defeated, the crowd began to die down again, allowing her voice to be heard cracking slightly with emotion as the day she thought would never come was upon her. Champion, having defeated me, accept my title as Pokémon Master, and promise to lead the Pokémon League to the best of your ability, until you are incapable of the role. Judge fairly, lead wisely, and uphold the values on which the League was founded. Without any emotion, his voice completely neutral even as it was amplified around the stadium, Ash responded as expected of him. I accept both the title, and the challenge. Nobody had heard him talk normally. During his battles, he had rarely spoken, giving only a single command at any point. Cynthia then turned and walked up to a platform in the stadium where she picked up an emblem and handed it to Ash, who had followed her. The emblem represented the Pokémon Master, and was a solid gold badge, with a different part of it devoted to each type, a lightning bolt for electricity, a flame for fire and so on. With the passing of the emblem, Cynthia passed over her title, her rank, her whole life. All this Ash accepted without any emotion or even words. Cynthia then stepped down, and joined Mr. Goodshow at the foot of the platform. They turned expectantly to the champion as he looked towards the stadium. Ash looked out with an even gaze. He had planned for this moment through the years, thinking of something to say. He knew his inaugural address was expected to set the tone for his reign, and as a result he knew he had to be careful. His ideas could be considered radical. Whilst he might be considered cold, and cared for few beyond his Pokémon, he did still understand what other people expected. He realized he had paused for too long, and looked out into the silence once again. Clearing his throat, he began speaking, his voice being amplified across the stadium despite no visible microphone. Elites, gym leaders, researchers, trainers. Anybody with an interest in Pokémon. I stand before you as your new champion. I expect that all of you have questions for me that you would like to ask. So I feel that I should clarify some things first. As has already been made clear, I shall never give interviews to the media. Equally, my name shall not be revealed. Mr. Goodshow has agreed to oblige me in this. With respect to. This guy is intense, muttered Gary. I don't even know where to start in analyzing him. The gang was still sat around the TV, unable to look away. The champion was working his way through how he would work as champion. It became clear that underneath his cool exterior, there was a fearsome intelligence driving the champion. However, what they were waiting for, was his plans for the Pokémon League. Now, my plans for the league itself. During her reign, Cynthia tried to make sure that the gym leaders across the regions would be able to maintain the high standard expected. This I agree with. However, Cynthia also believed that she should devote a considerable amount of her time to teaching young trainers. I disagree. I plan to ensure that there is a structure in place that means that any young trainer can become great by working with the gym leaders. As such, I shall be carefully watching the gyms, and ensuring that they are not only up to the very high standard expected, but also doing their traditional role, teaching trainers. At the founding of the Pokémon League, gyms took in a large number of trainers and taught them. It required gym leaders to be far more versatile than just battlers. I will make sure that this is true once again, and any leader who is unable to complete the tasks required of them will be replaced, either in training new trainers or in their abilities to defend their badge. It is possible that you will think I am being harsh. To you I say, I intend to uphold all the traditions of the League, and this is merely the first. However, when the League was first founded, the Pokémon Master did train a select few. The strongest trainers around that do not necessarily wish to be part of an Elite Four, would expect to be allowed to demonstrate to the Master what they could do, and if they were deemed good enough, they would be trained. This, I shall do. So, in an appeal to the strongest trainers out there. If you believe you are good enough, perhaps the best in your chosen type, or you believe you are a fearsome enough trainer, then come. Show me you are worthy, and I shall accept you as a student. Thank you, and once again I shall strive to fulfill everything I have promised, and to give you a league you can truly be proud of. Silence reigned in the Ketchum house. None of them believed what they were hearing. Did he honestly plan to fire gym leaders? There hadn't been a gym leader actually fired for more than 30 years. To think that people they knew could soon be removed was shocking. However, as the final part of his speech sunk in, Misty suddenly gasped. She knew she was a good trainer. She knew she could be considered perhaps the strongest water Pokémon trainer around, having won the World Cup the previous year. And the Pokémon Master had just announced that the strongest trainers would have a chance to prove what they could do, and then train under him. This was an opportunity that she could not pass up if she wanted to fulfill her dream. She then realized that the others were still discussing the speech. Guys. Misty started. Then stopped when they all turned to look at her. I think. Tracy smiled. You think you should try to get him to train you, don't you, Misty? How did you? Misty, I'm dating your sister. She knows how desperately you want to become a water Pokémon Master, and you phased out as soon as he said that he'd train the strongest trainers. It wasn't hard for a watcher. Misty, are you sure about this? Brock asked. I mean, how do you show that you are one of the strongest? I know you're good, and I know you've improved massively from when you started, but a lot of great trainers are out there. How do you prove you're the best? And there was the stumbling block. Nobody was sure how to persuade somebody with the power of the champion that they were worth training. Max suggested telling him that she had won the World Cup, but as Gary pointed out, so had a lot of people. That put you high, but not at the top. Her gym record spoke for itself, but again it wasn't enough to prove she was the best or even that close. She could potentially even get a recommendation from Professor Oak, or some of the other gym leaders, but it could easily be ignored. Then Drew started to laugh. What's so funny? Snapped the water trainer. If you have an idea, spit it out. Drew flicked her hair, and grinned. Isn't it obvious? If you want to demonstrate how good you are, show him. Even May looked a bit annoyed at this one, pushing his arm away from around her shoulders so she could twist and glare at her boyfriend. Drew, that's what we are trying to work out, how to show him. I know. But I meant literally show him. He has just been sworn in as Pokémon Master. For the next month, anybody who wishes to test themselves need only go to the Indigo Plateau and ask to fight him, and he has to accept. If you want to show him how good you are, fight him, and show him that way. Misty gulped. This was, as Drew had pointed out, blindingly obvious. However, having watched him battle, she was terrified. Did she really want to fight the most powerful trainer in living memory? She had watched him battle Cynthia, and watched one Pokémon wipe the floor with her. Then Brock spoke again. Misty, I know you don't want to face him. But think, if you want to train with him, you cannot be scared. You have to be able to capable of facing him, and doing your best. You won't win, in fact, it's unlikely that you will even knock out one of his Pokémon. But if you fight well, you might just do enough to make him think about training you. And whilst it will hurt to think about it, if Ash were here, what would he suggest you do? There was no counter to that argument. They all knew what their friend would have suggested. Try. Even rushing into it. Face it, rushing into things was Ash's specialty. He never thought anything through. However, Misty was still unsure, but May then spoke up. Misty, you know you'll have our support. We'll be there cheering you on. You can do this. Jessie then jumped in, face it twerp, if you've trained at all. Recently, you must be pretty good. You were always good enough to thrash us before. How hard can a battle be? Worst case, you lose. Badly. Like everybody else has, even the old master. Anything over that is a plus. Misty looked at her, but then felt a small tug against her leg. Looking down, she saw Pikachu looking up at her. She knelt, to pet him. What do you think, Pikachu? Should I do it? With a nod, the little mouse said, Pika. Pika chuppy, Pikachu. Misty looked up, a determined smile on her face. Fine. I'll try it. Tomorrow, we'll go to the plateau, and find out how many people are battling him and how long till we can. Later that afternoon, Gary took Misty outside to train. However, they both knew that whilst he still trained, his research meant that his Pokémon wouldn't stand a chance against hers. However, when she had pointed this out, Gary had laughed and said, "Don't you think you're being a bit arrogant? I was Ashy Boy's rival after all." Facing each other across the field with a river to the side, Gary suggested a one-on-one battle, to test the strength of Misty's best. Misty knew what this meant. Gary would use his starter, his Blastoise. She knew its power, but also that she could beat it easily. Pulling a Pokeball off her belt, she threw it, calling, "Misty calls Gyarados." The atrocious Pokémon materialized in the river with a roar, dove underwater and then drew itself up to its full height, glaring at Gary, who smirked. "Misty, I believe you're going up against a powerful opponent." "Well, I have nothing that could help you, aside from an old friend of yours. Whilst I doubt he is as strong as what you'll face, his typing should make things a little more challenging. Pikachu, would you do the honors?" Misty looked askance at Gary as the little yellow mouse darted out into the field. Gary just shrugged. When Pikachu heard what you were planning, he wanted to help you train. He is probably the strongest electric type we have, and that is what your Pokémon will be weak against. Whilst the champion probably won't bother with a type advantage, the strength of his Pokémon means that this should be good training for you. Now, shall we? Gyarados, Hydro Pump. Pikachu, dodge it, then use Thunderbolt. The giant serpent fired a huge torrent of water at the mouse who darted to the left, and retaliated with a bolt of electricity. The atrocious Pokémon didn't wait for an instruction, but dived into the water letting the bolt fly over its head. Its tail then swung out and caught Pikachu, throwing him across the field. As the rodent skidded to a stop, Misty called, Flamethrower. Agility. Follow it. Pikachu tried to avoid the torrent of fire, but it followed him, gaining ground. Pikachu, Volt Tackle away from it, and arc round towards Gyarados. Pikachu was surrounded by electricity, and raced away from the flamethrower. He then doubled back, and threw himself at Gyarados, with the collision causing the serpent to roar in pain. Gyarados, catch it now, and use Hyper Beam. Before Pikachu could get away, Gyarados' tail snaked around it. The mouse looked up to see the Pokémon's head facing it, an orange beam forming in front. Pikachu, get away, shouted Gary, fearing for the mouse Pokémon as it wouldn't be able to withstand the blast, but despite its writhing, Pikachu was unable to get free. Misty, I4. Pikachu. As the Hyper Beam raced out at Pikachu, he released a huge lightning bolt at it which caused a massive explosion. The mouse was thrown across the field, where it lay, before wearily climbing to its feet, and facing the cloud of smoke. Suddenly, Gyarados threw itself out at Pikachu, a look of rage on its battered face. The effects of Pikachu's counter were clear, but the serpent was still able to fight. Pikachu was sent flying by the collision, but righted himself and landed on his feet. However, before he could attack again, Gary called out, Misty, enough. If this goes on, one of these two is going to get seriously hurt. Pikachu looked back at Gary, who nodded, gesturing him to return. Misty held out her arm with a Pokeball. Gyarados, return. She looked up, to see Gary approaching her, Pikachu by his side. Impressive. Pikachu is one of the most powerful electric types I've seen, and your Gyarados held its own despite the double-type disadvantage. He may even have one. Pikachu. Okay Pikachu, he might not have, Gary chuckled. However, admit it, he was strong. Seeing the rodent consider his statement, Gary turned back to Misty. I know he is your strongest so the others won't be as powerful, but Gyarados was fearsome. He would outclass most of what I have. You have come on a long way, Ash would be proud. Misty smiled. She had matured a lot over the 7 years, no longer with such a fiery temperament, although she could still anger quickly. Her friends all knew how upset she had been when Ash had vanished, and even worse as time went on. She had focused that into her training, vowing to make him proud, and Gary was just seeing the results. She bent down and scratched Pikachu behind his ears making him coo, before looking up at Gary. Thanks. I still hope I'm ready. He is going to be hard to fight. Can you ask Max if he made a recording of the battle against Cynthia? I want to see how he fought her Milotic. I'm going to head out for a bit, get some training in. Sure, Gary replied. And Misty? Good luck, and with a small smile, he turned back to the Ketchum residence. Misty walked down the river, finding a spot where she could dip her feet in. She sat there, and threw her Pokeballs out, allowing her entire team to appear in front of her. She watched them as they settled down in the river, close enough to hear her speak without her having to raise her voice. Today, a new Pokémon Master was sworn in. He has promised to personally train the best trainers around. I feel that we should make ourselves fit into that category. Therefore, tomorrow we shall be heading to the Indigo Plateau to show to him what we are made of. However, it will be brutal. He is the most powerful trainer in the world, and we shall have to fight him. Since you are the ones who will be taking the battering, please, tell me now if you don't want this." Her team watched her, in silence. Almost pitying in their looks, like she didn't understand something. Misty looked at Gyarados. "Gyarados, it was a fearsome battle you fought earlier. The match against the champion will be far harder. Are you sure that you are going to be able to stand it?" Gyarados roared, as if it was insulted that she was suggesting it couldn't fight. The other Pokémon copied, and adopted fighting stances. Misty watched, with tears in her eyes, as she realized that they would fight for her. In fact, they would do almost anything for her. It was a sobering thought, but she pushed it aside. "Thank you. Thank you all of you. Now, to be at our best for tomorrow, we are going to have to train today. I don't want you hurting each other, but I want you to work on speed and evasion." It was some time later that Misty returned to the Ketchum residence, somewhat tired, but buoyed up for the following day. She found that Gary had left the video she asked for by the TV, so she settled down to watch it in the time before Mrs. Ketchum managed to cook dinner with the help of Brock. She watched as the champion's Charizard destroyed Cynthia's team, and how, despite its type weakness, its attacks burned straight through to Milotic. It was at the end, where a flamethrower went straight through a hydro pump and knocked Milotic out, that Misty knew she was in trouble. She didn't know what the champion would use, but if it possessed the power of his Charizard, she would not stand a chance. As the video came to an end, with Charizard slamming Garchomp into the ground with a deadly seismic toss, before firing a flamethrower attack at it to knock it out, Misty heard a voice from next to her. "Watching you reminds me of him." Mrs. Ketchum had come to find Misty, and sat next to her. She had heard about the water trainer's plan, and knew that she would need some comfort. "With you out training, traveling to become stronger, and now preparing for a battle tomorrow, you are doing exactly what he did." Misty didn't know what to say. She didn't want to remind Delia about her son, but she wanted to keep doing what he would have wanted her to do. But before she could try to say something, Delia carried on. "Thank you, Misty. Without you in a way fulfilling his dream, I don't think I could carry on. I know he would want to be where you are now, but I know that if he couldn't be, he would want nothing more than to have one of his friends doing it. You do him proud, and you do his memory proud. Thank you for honoring my son." With that, Delia got up and walked slowly away. At the door she turned and said with a sad smile, "Dinner's ready, if you want to come and eat like him too." Inside the Indigo Plateau, Ash was standing in his office, looking out the window. There was a knock on the door. "Enter," came the curt command. Cynthia pushed the door open, and walked in, looking slightly apprehensive. She looked around and saw the figure by the window, before noticing his hat on his desk, behind which was a very simple chair. The office was very simple, having already been redecorated by Ash himself. The changes weren't numerous because Cynthia had simple tastes, similar to Ash. Cynthia was reflecting on this, when a voice caused her to jump. "Sit." Ash had moved to behind the desk, and sat in the chair there. Looking round, Cynthia realized he was gesturing towards a chair opposite him, across the desk. She quickly moved to the chair, and sat down. She looked across the table, and for the first time, saw the Pokémon Master's face without it being hidden by his hat. He had a sharply defined face, but what caught her attention were his eyes. One was dark and utterly void of anything. The other was electric blue, and dancing with energy. They were quite unlike anything that Cynthia had seen before, but her staring was interrupted by a chuckling from the man to whom they belonged. "If you are going to spend the entire time staring at my eyes, I'll put the hat back on. I just thought it might be useful for the purposes of this meeting for you to see me properly." Blushing, Cynthia looked down and muttered, "No, it's fine. Sorry, just they are so unusual. Don't worry about it. I understand that they are not what you're used to. Now, I suspect you are wondering why I asked you for this meeting. Put simply, I have a proposition for you. As you heard, I will not train upcoming Pokémon trainers like you did. I shall be devoting my time to other matters, as well as training a small group of elites. I expect gym leaders to be taking charge in training youngsters, but there will also need to be somebody coordinating the effort, as well as evaluating the stronger candidates. I would like you to be that person. Cynthia was shocked. This man had publicly stated that he would not take an active role in teaching except to a few, and then invited her to do exactly what he had just said he wouldn't do. It was a maddening bit of politics, and infuriating to be manipulated like this. Because the job would be perfect for her after her defeat, and she suspected that the man sat opposite her knew it. Such an opportunity was unlikely to come around twice, so she knew she should probably take it. And she might have been about to agree, when there was a knock on the door and a man entered. "Sir, there is a challenger here, claiming the right to battle you." Ash looked at him. "The first one? About time, I was beginning to think that nobody would battle me." "Very well, who is it?" "A misty waterflower, sir. The match is scheduled to start in 30 minutes. "Thank you. I'll be along momentarily." Cynthia, at this she looked up. "Can I expect an answer after the battle?" "Please think about it, I believe that you really are the right person for this. Now, if you'd excuse me." Ash stood up, rounded the desk and strode out, leaving Cynthia to contemplate what had just happened. She then realized she could go and watch a match between a trainer that had crushed her and a water trainer who she had been following for a while. It was a match she really wanted to see, and so she hurried out of the office, not seeing the door that swung shut behind her by itself. This is a battle between the Pokémon Master, the Champion and Misty Waterflower. It is a test match, meaning nothing is riding on the outcome. Misty is the first trainer to want to challenge the Champion, and having seen how he destroyed opponents during the World League, it isn't surprising nobody wants to face him. "Don't remind me," Misty growled at the announcer, his voice carrying into the waiting room. The shock on the face of the receptionist a mere 2 hours before was still on her mind. She had expected to have to wait some time to face the Champion, but it seemed that nobody was willing to go up against him, fearing his power. As a result, she was able to face him almost immediately. The stadium wasn't particularly busy, but there was a reasonable crowd, hoping to be able to watch the Master battle once again. If Misty hadn't challenged him, it was highly possible that there wouldn't have been a challenge that day at all. And now, please welcome to the field the challenger, Misty Waterflower, and the Pokémon Master, the Champion. Misty took a deep breath and walked out, seeing a dark figure come to her from across the stadium. Meeting in the middle, she took the offered hand, and looked up into his face, only to realize that it was hidden by the shadow cast by a hat. As she pulled her hand back, she took another breath and launched into speech. "You wanted people who think they are good to train. I think that I am strong enough, if you'll teach me." A deep voice emanated from the shadowed face. "So that is why you wanted to challenge? Miss Waterflower, I believe you are a water trainer. Then a water field should give you the edge. Do your best." As the Champion spoke, the field began to split, and then a water field appeared in its place. There was a platform at either end for the trainers, and a series of platforms dotted around, but these were very small. Misty was reminded of the Cerulean gym, just the platforms were far smaller. She looked into the stands where she saw all of her friends watching, as well as her sisters and the trainers from the Cerulean gym. Her opponent started walking back to his end, and Misty hurried to do the same. As they faced each other across the pool, the referee stepped forward. "This is a full battle between the challenger Misty Waterflower and the Pokémon Master on a water field. The Master shall choose his Pokémon first. Neither side may make substitutions. Trainers, choose your Pokémon." Wordlessly, the figure across from Misty raised his arm. A Pokémon materialized in the water near him. Misty breathed a sigh of relief when she realized he wasn't using his Charizard, but then looking at it she wondered what she was facing. It was a torpedo-shaped shark, with a cross on its head. Misty saw May pull out her Pokédex, and listened for what she had to fight. Sharpedo, the brutal Pokémon. Nicknamed the Bully of the Sea, Sharpedo is widely feared. Its cruel fangs grow back immediately if they snap off. Misty gulped. This particular water Pokémon wasn't cute at all. In fact, it looked ready to kill. For the first time, she thought that perhaps her younger self grandly stating that all water Pokémon are cute might have been wrong. Knowing she had to make a good impression, she pulled out a Pokeball, and shouted, "Misty calls Gyarados." The Pokémon appeared with a roar and a huge splash, causing the few spectators to gasp, and with good reason. Anybody who hadn't seen Misty's Gyarados develop would have been impressed at the size and aura of power it projected. However, looking over to her opponent, Misty couldn't see any emotion on the visible part of his face. Glancing down, she realized that Sharpedo, far from being intimidated, was sizing up Gyarados, to which the atrocious Pokémon responded in kind. The referee stepped forward and raised his flags above his head. The first battle is between Sharpedo and Gyarados. Are both trainers ready? Nods of assent from either end caused the referee to snap both flags down and call, "Begin." Ice Beam followed by Bite. Before Misty could even call a command, Gyarados was caught by a beam of ice that sent him reeling backwards. The atrocious Pokémon roared in pain, a roar that became painfully loud as Sharpedo's teeth closed around his tail. Misty gasped in shock. The speed of Sharpedo was incredible. It moved through the water faster than anything she had ever seen. Poison Jab, came the next command. "Gyarados, throw it away now." As Sharpedo relaxed his teeth, Gyarados swung his tail around, causing the shark to be thrown across the pool. However, before Misty could do anything else, a curt command came from across the pool. "Giga Impact." Sharpedo instantly reversed its flight, and slammed into Gyarados. The atrocious Pokémon was sent crashing down into the pool, sending a wave across it which soaked Misty. As she shook her now sodden hair out of her eyes, she saw Gyarados lying in the pool, not moving at all. The attack had been overkill. Sharpedo had settled down back where he started, not showing any signs of having fought at all. Misty shakily felt for Gyarados' Pokeball and recalled her Serpent, rapidly revising the strength of her opponent. It did not make for pleasant thoughts. She pulled out another Pokeball, and threw it, not bothering to call the name of the released Pokémon. A large red fish appeared, with a powerful horn on its forehead. It looked across the pool to its opponent, and a look of fierce determination crossed its face. Gary leaned back in his seat, whistling softly. Next to him Brock was nodding approvingly, but Max was struggling to see what they were all so impressed by. All he had seen was the champion think very quickly on his feet to save his Pokémon from an embarrassing landing. Looking at the older men, he mentioned this, causing Gary to chuckle. "Max, that wasn't luck." He knew that Misty, fearing for Gyarados, would try to get Sharpedo as far away as possible, and with it biting on Gyarados' tail that means throwing it. However, as soon as Sharpedo was in the air, Giga Impact had the benefit of gravity driving it, making it that much more powerful. I think he had that planned from the moment Misty released Gyarados. I hate to say it, but even if he had weak Pokémon, Misty would struggle if he can think that far ahead. That was a strategy far beyond anything I've seen. Combine that with the sheer power of the Pokémon, I mean a Sharpedo that can destroy Gyarados that fast is unreal, and you have a virtually unbeatable battler. No wonder Cynthia lost. Max stared. There is no way that he planned that. That's impossible. Brock looked over at the young trainer before answering. Max, you are watching as close to a perfect battler as you will ever see. I'm not sure if he will ever lose. Gary then added in a teasing voice. You've picked a good idol, Max, too bad you'll never be as good as him. Max was about to shout at Gary, but a voice in his ear stopped him. Max, don't let him get to you. One day you'll be strong enough to get him to train you, and then you will be able to destroy Gary. Max spun around to see James moving away, although he looked back and smiled at the younger trainer. May then hushed everybody as the next round was about to begin. Seaking vs. Sharpedo. Begin, called the referee, snapping his flags down once again. Sea King, horn drill now, called Misty, desperate to get an attack in before she was obliterated again. Sharpedo, scary face. Sea King surged forwards, to be greeted by a face from her darkest nightmares. She shrunk back, her horn slowing down from its drilling, to return to normal. Misty clenched her fists in frustration, before shouting a new command. Sea King, water pulse. Dive, and use crunch. Sea King agility. Sea King fired a large ball of water at Sharpedo, who dove underwater before surging up over Sea King, who was trying to obey her trainer's desperate cry and dodge. Sharpedo missed on the way up, but then his jaws closed around Sea King on the descent. Sharpedo, take it for a ride. The brutal Pokémon dove back underwater, Sea King still in its jaws. A few moments later a platform was suddenly sent flying into the air, before crashing into the water. Where the platform had been, Sea King lay, its body bruised, and unmoving. The referee raised his flag. Sea King is unable to battle. Sharpedo is victorious. Misty quickly returned Sea King, and threw out another Pokeball. Dugong, show time. A pearly white body appeared in the pool, causing many of the women in the audience to go glassy-eyed at its beauty. However, there was little opportunity to appreciate it as the referee's flags went up again. Dugong vs. Sharpedo. Begin, called the referee as he snapped his flags down. Dugong, ice beam. Copy. Dugong fired out a blue beam, but Sharpedo retaliated and the shark's beam pushed straight through, sending Dugong crashing into the water. Before Misty or her Pokémon could recover, Sharpedo tore through, smashing into Dugong, throwing her out of the water and landing on a platform. Like the two Pokémon before her, Dugong was clearly knocked out. Dugong is unable to battle. Since Misty has lost 3 Pokémon, there shall be a 10-minute break, called the referee. Misty recalled Dugong, thanking it, and watched as her opponent silently recalled Sharpedo, turning on his heel and striding into his room. Misty shakily made her way into her own room. As soon as she was out of sight of the crowd she collapsed onto a bench, shaking. The first half of the battle had lasted a mere 5 minutes. The Sharpedo was deadly in the water, and its attacks were crushingly powerful. Whilst Dugong was one of her weakest in terms of endurance, to have it taken out so quickly was terrifying. And Gyarados. It was her strongest, the only Pokémon who could match it in endurance was Golduck, who hated to lose when she was watching. She knew the duck Pokémon would fight to the point of exhaustion for her, and she knew he would this day because of what it meant to her. Misty felt her shaking increase, and felt something wet land on her knees. She rubbed her eyes and realized she was crying. She had spent years training for this moment, the chance to prove herself to a great trainer and be taught, but she hadn't even got a hit in yet. Half her team was down and each one was falling quicker than the next. She let the tears flow as she held the Pokeballs containing Gyarados, Sea King, and Dugong. Each of these Pokémon she had a bond with, and each of them had been ruthlessly destroyed by the champion. She now knew how well he had earned that title. She never thought she would be crushed so effortlessly. A buzzer snapped her out of her misery. She had 1 minute left. Standing up, she rubbed at her eyes to try to and hide the signs of her tears. With a new determination she strode out. She was going to make her opponent respect her. As she took her place on her side of the pool, she watched her opponent throw his Pokeball before even ordered to. Sharpedo appeared once again, grinning at her, inviting her to face it once again. Misty pulled a new Pokeball from her belt. Misty calls Starmie. May leaned towards Dawn, before muttering into her ear. She's been crying. This is hurting her. Dawn nodded before bouncing to her feet and shouting, "Come on Misty, you can do it. Beat this guy." May just sunk back into her seat, thinking, why do I even bother? The referee stepped back up to his mark, before raising his flags. Starmie vs. Sharpedo. Are both trainers ready? A quick nod from each side caused the flags to snap down. Begin. Starmie, Psychic. Crunch. The gem at the center of the purple star glowed, and blue light appeared around Sharpedo. The brutal Pokémon ignored it and charged towards the star, crunching down on it with its teeth. Again came the command from the champion. The shark obeyed, before throwing the tar into the sky. It flew into the air and crashed onto a platform, not moving. Starmie is unable to battle. Sharpedo is victorious. "I don't get it," said May. "How come Psychic didn't do anything?" "It isn't necessarily well known, but Sharpedo is part dark. Therefore, any psychic attack is useless," answered Gary knowledgeably. Misty clearly didn't know that. Also, Crunch being a dark move is going to be even stronger against Starmie. That was perhaps the worst matchup she could have chosen. "Don't be so cruel to her," scolded Dawn. "She is doing her best. I'd like to see you fight the Pokémon Master." "Dawn, I'm not deliberately being mean. I'm merely pointing out that she had absolutely no chance of beating Sharpedo with Starmie. She needs to make the most of the one Pokémon she has that has a strength against that shark. She should use it now. I choose you, Poliwrath." The muscled figure of Poliwrath appeared on the platform nearest Misty, flexing its muscles. It took one look at the scoreboard and then did a double take. It showed just one Pokémon on the champion's side, whilst Misty was down 4. Poliwrath?" the tadpole Pokémon questioned. "Poliwrath, do not underestimate that Sharpedo, it's the strongest thing you'll have ever faced." Poliwrath vs Sharpedo. Begin. Poliwrath, wait for it to come to you on the platform. Take down. As Poliwrath got into a defensive stance, Sharpedo raced across the pool, diving underneath and slamming the platform into the air. Poliwrath was thrown off balance, but Misty was quick enough to save it. Bubble beam into the pool slightly to the left. The surge of bubbles directed Poliwrath onto another platform, where he settled into another stance. Take down. This sequence happened 3 more times, with Poliwrath becoming more adept at landing each time. As he landed again, a different command came from across the pool. Surf. A huge wall of water raced at Poliwrath, but Misty finally moved to the offensive. Poliwrath, wait for it to come and then karate chop. As the wall of water crashed into the tadpole, it went with the impact leaving the platform but then lunged at Sharpedo who was in the wave, crashing his arm into the shark. Unfortunately, Sharpedo's skin hurt the tadpole Pokémon, which was rapidly exacerbated when he glowed purple and fell to a knee, poisoned from a poison jab covered by surf. Before Sharpedo could get away, Poliwrath reached out and grabbed him, enduring the pain from his skin. Poliwrath, get it onto the platform, Misty called, seeing a chance to really damage the brutal Pokémon. Poliwrath heaved its prey onto the platform and then leaped after it. Now Poliwrath, it can't dodge, use SBMSN. Dodge. Poliwrath reached for Sharpedo, but the shark had managed to move away with staggering speed. Misty gasped as she saw the fish managing to use its fins to run on land. Its 2 side fins had managed to bend down and propel it away from the tadpole Pokémon and across the platform. Poliwrath looked stunned and was momentarily exposed. Giga Impact. The shark streaked across the platform, smashing into Poliwrath, sending him flying until his passage was stopped by the wall. Misty cringed, knowing that her fighting Pokémon had fallen. She turned and extended a Pokeball, returning Poliwrath. She reached for her final ball, and threw it. Golduck, you're up. A blue duck appeared with a yellow bill, flexing its muscles. He glared across the water at Sharpedo who merely smirked back. Golduck then turned to hear its trainer calling to him. Golduck, you know how important this is to us. You are the last one, he has beaten everybody else. Do your best for all of us. Golduck nodded, then adopted a fighting stance. The referee stepped forwards with both of his flags raised. Golduck vs Sharpedo. Begin. Golduck, water gun. Crunch. Dodge and get into the water. Golduck fired a stream of water at the shark, but Sharpedo charged straight through it, barely seeming to notice. He threw himself at Golduck, but the duck Pokémon dived into the pool, swimming away as quickly as possible. Ice Beam. Before Golduck could dodge, he was trapped in a block of ice that bobbed to the surface of the pool. Sharpedo then charged in once again and smashed through the ice, biting down on Golduck. The duck screamed in pain and flailed out, trying to dislodge Sharpedo, but without success. Throw and use Giga Impact. Misty was powerless to watch her Pokémon get crushed as Golduck was thrown into the air before Sharpedo smashed into him from below. Golduck rose into the air once again and crashed down onto a platform, causing smoke to appear. Sharpedo returned to settle in front of his trainer. However, as the smoke cleared, Golduck was slowly clambering to his feet. His blue body is covered in bruises, yet he refused to lie down when his trainer needed him. Misty could see that Golduck was beyond the end of his tether, but had a chance to impress her opponent with her Pokémon's endurance and didn't want to forfeit. Golduck, Hydro Pump. Take down. Golduck fired a torrent of water at Sharpedo, who slipped to the side before sending Golduck flying with another powerful attack. Again, the stadium thought the battle was over, but again Golduck was able to climb to his feet, although barely able to stand. He simply refused to lie down, despite the crushing power of his opponent's attacks. Again. With Golduck too tired to even attempt to dodge, Sharpedo used Takedown, sending the duck back to the ground, where he crawled to his feet, no longer even able to move. At this point, no more commands were forthcoming from the champion, and Misty watched her Pokémon try to regain some sort of battle posture. In the stands the gang was in awe of Golduck's endurance. They had seen the power of Sharpedo's attacks as he dispatched the rest of Misty's team, but this Pokémon seemed was refusing to give up. What's he waiting for? May asked as the champion's inaction lengthened. Golduck is finished, he needs to just hit it again. Brock and Gary looked at each other, as realization sank in. Brock turned to May and explained. He is waiting for Misty to recall Golduck. She should know he can't win, and is in no state to fight, so to stop her Pokémon being harmed she should recall it. However, I don't think she is thinking straight anymore. Her team has been decimated, but she has one Pokémon that is refusing to give up. I think she will be trying to show him that her team has endurance. She will be driven by anger to try and get revenge. But if he's waiting for her to recall Golduck, shouldn't she do that? May persisted. Yes, but I doubt she will. Her will to prove herself and the stubbornness of that duck will make it hard for her to withdraw it. Back on the field, Golduck has regained its feet, and Misty called for another water gun attack. Sharpedo looked back at his trainer who nodded. A gold beam formed in front of its mouth, before firing at Golduck. The hyper beam smashed straight through the water gun and sent the duck flying backwards once more. Golduck skidded to the ground, immobile for a moment, but then with one hand began to haul itself to its feet once again. There were gasps from around the stadium. To take two of the most powerful attacks around and to still get up was unbelievable. Sharpedo, end it. Before Golduck had finished regaining its feet, Sharpedo darted forwards and tackled it to the ground. Again Golduck began climbing to its feet, but as it tried again, Sharpedo tackled it once more. After 3 more tackles, Sharpedo returned to its trainer, as Golduck was barely able to even more an arm. However, unbelievably, he then slowly pushed itself to its knees, and then to its feet. Facing Sharpedo once again, it glared across the pool at the shark that it refused to let defeat it. Misty took a deep breath. Golduck, can you still fight? Golduck didn't respond, but a golden beam appeared in front of the gem on his head, before firing across the pool at Sharpedo, who dived underwater. As the shark surfaced, preparing to attack once more, Golduck toppled forwards into the pool. Sharpedo dived after it, and pulled it to the surface, pushing it onto the platform. The duck lay there, not moving. Golduck! Misty screamed. Golduck, are you okay? The referee stepped forward, for the last time. Golduck is unable to battle. Misty is out of Pokémon, so the victory goes to the champion. Misty watched her opponent recall his Pokémon, and she reached out to do so herself. Holding out the Pokeball, a red beam came out, but stopped just short of Golduck. She tried again, and the same thing happened. Suddenly Golduck lifted off the platform and began to float away from Misty, towards her opponent. She looked up at him, as Golduck came to rest beside him. He knelt next to the stricken Pokémon and put a hand on the side of its head. A team of Nurse Joys and Chanseys ran onto the field with a stretcher, where they lifted Golduck, the champion, never moving his hand from the side of the Pokémon. As the stretcher moved away, Golduck's Pokeball suddenly flew out of Misty's hand and was caught by her opponent. Misty felt sick, she hadn't realized how hard she had pushed her Pokémon. She hurried after the stretcher as it rapidly moved away down a tunnel at the side of the stadium. What just happened? Drew asked. What was he doing to Golduck? I have absolutely no idea, came Brock's response. Gary, any clues? Only one. He is a psychic, was the researcher's suggestion. Like Sabrina? Could be. Brock mused. Although from what I remember about Sabrina, she is one of the most powerful psychics around and she would struggle to move a Pokémon like that whilst moving. Usually she stands still when working. Yeah, but it would explain how Golduck was moved away if he was a strong psychic. Gary argued. Dawn was listening, but finally butted in. Guys, does it matter? Our friend was just crushed, one of her Pokémon just been taken away and you're arguing over whether he is a psychic. Sorry, they muttered quietly. As they looked up, they saw May, Max, Dawn, Jessie, James and Meowth all heading down the stairs to try to find Misty. Get it on the operating table, I need to see if it has any internal injuries. Nurse Joy commanded her Chanseys. Ash kept his hand on the side of Golduck's head, with his eyes shut. Nurse Joy turned to him. Sir, I'm afraid you're going to have to wait outside. Under his hat, Ash's eyes snapped open, although Joy couldn't see. No. I'll heal him. His tone left no room for argument, and it never occurred to the nurse that she should try to overrule him. Ash shut his eyes again and focused on Golduck. He sent out his aura into the duck Pokémon, looking for any internal injuries. As he found them he pushed power into the tissue around them, healing them before moving on. Nurse Joy had set up an X-ray, and she couldn't believe what she was seeing. The Pokémon shouldn't have survived the journey with injuries like these, and now they were being healed in front of her eyes. As the last of the internal injuries was sealed, Ash pulled a Pokeball from his belt, releasing Meganium. Not moving his hand, he caused all the lights in the room to snap on, and then turned to his Pokémon. Heal. The leaf Pokémon wrapped its vines around Golduck and then began to absorb energy from the lights, to transfer to the wounded duck. Meganium's eyes widened as it realized how badly wounded the Pokémon was, and looked questioningly at its trainer. Ash just shrugged. As the bruises on Golduck's body began to heal, Ash placed his hand the duck once again and began transferring energy. After nearly 5 minutes of transferring energy, Ash and Meganium withdrew. Ash then turned to the stunned nurse who had watched him heal a Pokémon that she had thought would take her hours. Let him rest. I can't restore his full energy, but he will be fine. Nobody can see him, not even his trainer. I'll collect him tomorrow morning. Ash then recalled his Meganium and walked out. Nurse Joy ran after him, and called for him to stop, which he did, but didn't turn around. Champion, what did you do? I just saved a Pokémon's life. How is irrelevant? Why can't his trainer see him? She'll be worried. She is the reason he was hurt. Her license will be reviewed. Still having not turned at all, Ash strode out the door, and back towards the stadium which the center was next to and where his office was. A few minutes later Misty dashed through the doors. Nurse Joy looked up from where she was behind the desk, trying to analyze what had happened. Nurse Joy, where is my Golduck? I have to see him. Nurse Joy frowned. This was the trainer who had caused her Pokémon to nearly die. She had analyzed the injuries whilst they were healed. It was very possible without the champion's aid she wouldn't have been able to do anything. She stood up, frowning at the women in front of her. "Miss Waterflower, I cannot allow this. Pokémon Master left clear instructions that nobody was permitted to visit, even explicitly stating that you in particular could not. Perhaps you should appeal and see what he thinks about the state you let your Pokémon get into. If it wasn't for his intervention I would have struggled to save your Pokémon." Misty faltered. This was unexpected. She couldn't see her friend. And the Master's intervention? What had happened here? She felt her eyes filling with tears. "But Nurse Joy, I want to." "No. Do not make me have to throw you out. You may wait here if you wish, but you will not be allowed to see him. The Pokémon will rest here until the Pokémon Master deems otherwise. As his right with a Pokémon he feels to have been mistreated." At this moment the rest of the gang came into the Pokémon Center. Gary was the first to reach Misty, and seeing her state he instantly took her into a hug. "Misty, what is happening? Where's Golduck? I can't see him. Nobody can apparently. He thinks I mistreat my Pokémon." Dawn turned to Nurse Joy, a furious expression on her face. "How can you stop a trainer from seeing her own injured Pokémon? It's her responsibility, she should be allowed to see it. Misty would never mistreat any of her Pokémon." Nurse Joy bridled at this. If she was so worried about it, she shouldn't have let it get in such a state. "I am only obeying orders. The Pokémon Master has the right to protect a Pokémon he believes to have been mistreated. Given the state of Golduck, and the level of injuries, I have to concur with his view, and cannot therefore overrule him. But it was the Master that caused him to get so badly injured." Dawn exclaimed. Nurse Joy was about to answer, but Misty cut across Dawn, her voice sad and tearful. "Dawn, she is right. I let Golduck go too far. The champion was trying to prevent it getting hurt at the end, all he used was tackle. I should have recalled Golduck. Nurse Joy, can you please heal the rest of my Pokémon? We'll go and get some rooms, and I'll come back to collect them in the morning." Misty held out 5 Pokeballs, which Nurse Joy accepted. Misty then turned and walked slowly away, with the rest of the gang watching in disbelief. Gary turned and chased after her. The rest of the group looked at each other. "So," said Drew. "I think Gary's got that. Nurse Joy, do you have any rooms we can stay in?" Ash walked upstairs to where his office was and entered, settling himself behind his desk. He felt exhausted, having poured most of his energy into Misty's Pokémon trying to save him. He moved to his computer and searched through trainer profiles. He located Misty Waterflower and marked her license as under review, suspending it in the process. He then looked towards the door where he sensed a familiar person approaching. The door swung open of its own accord and Cynthia walked in, hesitating as she passed the threshold. The door shut itself behind her and she sat down in the chair in front of the desk once again. Cynthia knew exactly what she wanted. The job she had been offered was perfect for her, and would perhaps allow her to be a moderating influence on the man in front of her. It had surprised her when she realized it, but she actually agreed with what he was doing. She knew that the majority of gym leaders were powerful, but there were a few weaker ones. She also knew that many of them were bad at training upcoming trainers. If she became the overseer for this she could focus on what she loved, Pokémon and teaching. However, before she accepted she wanted to clarify a few things. "Champion," she started haltingly, before realizing how uncharacteristic this was and took a breath to calm herself. "What did you do with Golduck? His wounds are healed, and he is regaining energy. I couldn't restore it all." "You couldn't. Wait, what did you do?" "Healed him." "How? Does it matter?" "To me, yes. As well as a battler, I'm a researcher." "Yes, I know about your passion for research, Cynthia. You're wondering how a human is possibly able to heal a Pokémon when you know that the amount of energy a Pokémon has is far greater to that of a human. Suffice it to say, I have my ways. Golduck is fine. Cynthia blinked. She did not expect him to see through her that easily. Realizing that this question was probably not going to get answered, she moved on. The job you offered. I assume it's available. Yes. Then I would like to accept on a few conditions. Firstly, I would need full access to the trainer database, for obvious reasons. I would also expect a way of contacting you at any time. Equally, if I am to do this properly, I expect you to trust my judgment. If I say a trainer is good enough, it means you would have to give them a fair assessment, and if they are good enough, you will have to train them. This seems reasonable. When it comes to training, I would like to be able to use the facilities given over to you here at Indigo. Not all the time, but I would want to run camps here for promising trainers. You could even attend these to watch promising trainers. I will not use them all the time. If your demands for their use aren't excessive, this is acceptable. And I would like to know your name. That Cynthia, is something I can't give you. Why not? Surely you know, and if I'm going to work this closely for you, I expect you to trust me. My name is a closely guarded secret. It's not that I don't trust you, but I am always cautious. You will not be allowed to know it. However, if you wish to know my extent of trust for you, try entering the island a few miles from here. I believe it has been called Mystery Island. You are welcome there, although I do suggest you pick a time I am home for your first visit. Cynthia leaned back in her chair, breathing out. She had gained far more than she expected, the only thing missing was a name. And the revelation about Mystery Island was intriguing. She knew she couldn't reveal anything from the island if she wished to get closer to any of his other secrets, but to be able to get onto the island that had frustrated people for nearly 3 years was a very tempting offer. She remembered when it first appeared, a road appearing overnight, and a gate that was never open. Anybody who tried to fly over found themselves being diverted away. Nobody had managed to get onto it, ever. And she now could. Before she could say anything else, however, the man across the desk spoke once again. My criteria. Your main role is to help promising trainers who have potential. Much like you did as master, so you can do this as you see fit. However, you will also be my deputy. You may not divulge anything that passes between us, under any circumstances. And whilst I will listen to your advice, ultimately, decisions are mine alone. Agreed? As he spoke, he extended a hand over the desk. Cynthia thought a moment, then realized that this was what she wanted. She took the offered hand and shook it. Welcome back to the Pokémon League, Cynthia. Your appointment will be announced tomorrow. At 8 a.m. precisely, Ash Ketchum, Pokémon Master, stepped into the Pokémon Center. He found Nurse Joy behind the desk waiting for him. He nodded to her wordlessly, and she gestured to the corridor leading to the examination room. He followed her and stepped into the room. There was a blue Pokémon lying on the table, still out cold. Ash turned to the nurse. Did his trainer come by? Yes, sir. I forbade her from entering, as ordered. She eventually left her Pokémon with me to heal, which I have done so. Good. Let her know that I am looking after Golduck whilst he heals. He will be returned. There will be a representative here soon to talk to her. Thank you, Nurse Joy. With that, Ash held out a Pokeball, returned Golduck and walked out of the room, heading straight out of the Pokémon Center. Nurse Joy returned to her desk, and waited for Misty to come and collect her remaining Pokémon. Cynthia sat in the waiting area, irritated. It wasn't that she didn't realize that she would have to do this sort of thing, in fact it was better for her to do it. It's just she didn't realize she would have to do it on her first day. She cast her mind back to the meeting the previous night, immediately after she had accepted her new job. Flashback. You saw the battle, the figure on the other side of the desk said. It wasn't a question, but Cynthia nodded regardless. What did you think about Golduck? She should have recalled it. When it was hit by the Giga impact she should have. After the hyper beam I was shocked that she didn't. However, his endurance was staggering. Why? She wants me to train her. Throughout the fight I considered it. Her Pokémon were strong, and she is young. She has potential. However, she doesn't know when to stop. Part of being a trainer is looking after your Pokémon. I have no problem with her fighting, although outclassed, but she should have stopped her Golduck. As Pokémon Master, I have to mark her trainer's license for review, simply because not recalling her Pokémon counts as abuse when it is in that state. Thoughts? Cynthia was silent for a few moments. She knew that he was right, and as Master she would have done the same thing. In fact, she had suspended 4 trainers' licenses in the last year for the same reason. However, she respected Misty, and didn't want it to happen to her. Having agreed to speak her mind, she decided to do so. In principle I agree. However, she is an excellent trainer and I do not believe that she has actually abused any of her Pokémon. I might be wrong, but what if I'm right? If this was just a case of getting carried away, a warning will suffice. If you're wrong, you'll set a bad precedent, and ruin the career of a potentially great trainer. Agreed. That is why I shall personally review her case. I'm not expecting a particularly busy month, so I should have plenty of time. Tomorrow I shall have prepared a letter for you to give her, and you will meet her to explain the process. If I rule in her favor, she will be an excellent student for you. End flashback. This had brought Cynthia to her current position, waiting for Misty to come and collect her Pokémon, so she could be told about the current suspension on her trainer's license. Cynthia knew that she was unlikely to take the information particularly well, but she strongly suspected that the ruling would be in Misty's favor. The champion would be honest, she knew. She heard footsteps coming from the rooms further inside the center and looked around. Misty had appeared at last, along with a man she recognized as Gary Oak. Interesting, she mused. Wonder what he is doing with her and none of their other friends. Cynthia had taken a keen interest in one of their friends when she was champion of the Sinnoh region, but knew he had vanished 7 years ago. As time had gone by, Ash Ketchum had slipped out of her mind, but he had returned when she saw all his friends once again. He would have been a great pupil for her, perhaps even strong enough to be successor. At least, until the champion came along. Ash's disappearance had surprised her, but she couldn't spend too long searching. Hearing Misty talking to Nurse Joy, Cynthia composed herself and then stood up, striding across. Nurse Joy, is Golduck all right? Misty had regained her other 5 Pokeballs and was now asking about her 6th Pokémon. However, before the nurse could answer, Misty heard a cough behind her. She turned to see a tall woman with long blonde hair stood behind her. Even though she was no longer Pokémon Master, Cynthia was instantly recognizable. Before Misty could say anything, Cynthia gestured to the chairs around where she had waited. Miss Waterflower, may I talk to you? I need to ask about my Golduck. He was put into isolation yesterday, after I was forbidden from seeing him by the champion. I assure you, Miss Waterflower, your Pokémon is absolutely fine. He is, however, no longer here. Champion has taken him to continue his recovery, somewhere where he can be watched more easily. Now, there are a few things I need to discuss with you in an official capacity, so if you please. Gary jumped in at this point. No disrespect, but you are no longer the Pokémon Master. Surely you no longer have an official role. Cynthia chuckled. I was made an offer to stay on as a teacher. I shall be assisting the younger generation of Pokémon trainers, essentially what I was doing before. However, that is not why I am here. Miss Waterflower, if you please. They made their way over to the chairs, and sat down. Before Misty could ask the questions that were clearly bursting inside her, Cynthia held up a hand. Miss Waterflower, I have many things to talk to you about. I suggest that you don't interrupt me till I'm finished, it will make the process a great deal quicker. Misty nodded, so Cynthia continued. Firstly, You should be aware of the consequences of your actions in your battle yesterday. As Pokémon Master, Champion is required to keep an eye on any potential Pokémon abuse. Now, since I have tracked your progress for some time, I am aware that this is highly unlikely in your case. However, permitting your Golduck to keep battling after sustaining the injuries that it did is a form of Pokémon abuse. I spoke to Nurse Joy, and she was of the opinion that if Champion hadn't intervened, your Pokémon would have died. I do not know what his intervention was, but if it saved the life of your Golduck, you owe him a great debt. However, as you displayed blatant disregard for your Pokémon's safety in front of a Champion, he had no choice but to initiate an investigation into your treatment of Pokémon. His intention is to make it a short investigation as he doesn't believe that you abuse your Pokémon. However, as an ex-gym leader, I am sure you are aware that standard procedure is to have your training license temporarily suspended for the duration of the investigation. I am here to inform you of this. A notification has been placed on your Pokémon League account, and if there is any record of a battle in this time, there will be grounds for a revocation of your license, regardless of the outcome of the investigation. During this time you are also not allowed to train your Pokémon. Misty looked down, knowing that everything Cynthia said was not only true, but fair. She had pushed Golduck too far, and as an ex-gym leader she knew all the regulations for such an event. She looked back at Cynthia. When will a decision be made? I would expect a few days. In that time, there is a strong chance you will be required to attend an interview as well as some of your friends and colleagues from the gym. I suggest you warn them of the possibility. Misty nodded. Cynthia then handed an envelope over. This is from him. He told me to hand it to you. Should you need to contact me, I will be at the Indigo Plateau along with the rest of the Pokémon League. Thank you for your time. Cynthia stood up and moved away. She felt guilty that she had to be the bearer of such bad news, but that was the way it was. Somebody had to tell Misty, and at least this way the investigation could move quicker. She hoped Misty would be acquitted. She had a good career as a trainer ahead of her. Misty stood up to say goodbye to Cynthia, but as soon as the older trainer had left the Pokémon Center, she collapsed back into the chair, tears building in her eyes. Gary came over from where he had waited with Nurse Joy and sat next to her. He had spoken to the nurse and knew that Misty's trainer's license was under review. He didn't speak, just drew her into his arms. As Misty cried into his chest he gently rubbed her back, and waited for her to cry out. Once she had he sat back and gently took the letter from her hand. Misty, what's this? A letter, from the Pokémon Master. Came the quiet response. Gary raised his eyebrow, and slid his thumb under the flap, opening it. He took the letter out and held it under Misty's eyes. She pushed at it, but he persisted. Misty. You know you have to read this. I don't want to. Fine. I'll read it then. Somebody has to. Before Gary could even unfold it, Misty had snatched it from his hands. You'll do no such thing, Gary Oak. This is mine. Gary leant back once again, smiling as he knew he had reignited some fire in the once hot-headed woman. Misty, unaware of how she had been manipulated, opened the letter and began to read. Dear Miss Waterflower. By now you will be aware that your trainer's license has been suspended. This is due to the incident in your match yesterday. For the duration of the suspension, I must inform you that to train your Pokémon is a violation of the suspension and could result in the revocation of your license. Furthermore, an interview with you to discuss the events in the match, as well treatment of Pokémon in general is required. Should you wish to submit any other evidence for your defense, this interview is the time, and it shall be reviewed. If there is anybody who you feel can add to this investigation, ask them to attend. Please present yourself at the Indigo Plateau in 2 days' time at noon. As to your Golduck, he is staying with my Pokémon and will be returned to you at the conclusion of the license suspension, and if your license is revoked he will be treated the same as the rest of your Pokémon. If you have any further questions please contact the Pokémon League. Yours sincerely. Champion. Pokémon Master. Misty reread the letter. And then again. She couldn't believe it. She had expected the letter to be condemning her behavior, but she realized that the tone of it was utterly emotionless. She began to think about who she would ask to come with her on the day of the interview. Gary watched her change in attitude and stood up. Misty looked up at him. "Where are you going?" "To find the others. You're going to need some help planning a defense." As Gary walked off, Misty looked back down again. She had planned to ask Gary to appear on her behalf, as his name held reputation, as well as asking Brock, whom she had known the longest. Something Gary had said then clicked. How did he know she needed a defense? She realized that he had read the letter over her shoulder whilst she was focusing on it. She shoved the letter into her pocket and ran out of the door after the figure that had started running as soon as he was out of sight. Cynthia walked into the champion's office, again noting the door that opened for her of its own accord. Her boss sat behind his desk, typing whilst half a dozen files were open on his desk. Without looking up, he gestured for Cynthia to take a seat, and typed furiously for a moment more. He then looked up, turned in his chair and faced her. "Cynthia. What can I do for you? I wondered if you have any more jobs for me." Champion leaned back in his chair, staring at his subordinate. "You don't understand what I require from you. I have plans for the league, and I cannot spend my time training anybody who asks nicely. Anybody with real potential I will train when strong enough, but otherwise I will not be public. My lack of a name reinforces this. So when you want to know if I have work for you, the answer's no. You are autonomous. Anything I need you to do I'll tell you, but you don't need to be constantly checking in." He turned back to his desk, and returned to his work, as the door swung open behind Cynthia. She took the hint and stood up to leave, heading out the door and into her own office. She turned to her own work, working out a route to travel through to find strong trainers. When she had worked out her tour, she would release it to the press, challenging anybody who had potential. A smile worked its way over her face. She had passed the point of being upset over her defeat, and she was now working on her dream, to teach any upcoming Pokémon trainers. Gary had managed to escape from Misty's fury and was now sat with her, Brock, Dawn and James to work out how to help her prove her innocence. The others had wanted to help, but as Drew had pointed out, the ones that were some of the more influential in their group. The son of a world-famous Pokémon professor who had made his own name, the top coordinator, a renowned doctor, and James, who had built a great reputation as a skillful battler, and had given the Pokémon League information on Team Rocket after they quit. Suffice it to say, they thought these voices would be enough. They had returned to Pallet Town and were in Professor Oak's laboratory. The elderly researcher hadn't expressed his feelings on Misty's battle, but Gary had said he probably didn't approve. Regardless, they all knew that Misty wasn't a Pokémon abuser, and they had all planned to quote examples of when she had performed acts of the opposite nature. James even intended to dip back into his time with Team Rocket to find times when Misty had fought to save her Pokémon from being stolen. They were just finishing their plans when Gary leaned back in his chair and chuckled slightly. They all looked at him questioningly. "Do you not find it ironic, that the one person we really need is the one person whose fault this is? I mean, face it, Misty, it was Ashy Boy's disappearance that drove you to be as strong as you are. I suspect you are the strongest water trainer around, Pokémon Master accepted. And the person who probably could find some stupid way to get you out of this is Ash." James chuckled, but Brock and Dawn looked at each other waiting for the explosion. When it didn't come, they warily looked over at Misty, who appeared surprisingly sedate. "Yeah, true. He would be useful here. Pikachu. What would Ash say?" Pikachu, came the response from the mouse. He then gestured to himself. Misty blinked. Of course, she could use Pikachu as evidence. She had been the one that spent time looking after the Pokémon when he first returned. She knew that the fact she had taken him in was strong evidence in her favor. "Thank you, Pikachu." Misty grinned at the rodent, who smiled back. "Of course we'll take you. Now, we'll head up in the morning on the day." I'm going to go and explain to my Pokémon the situation. She stood up and walked out, leaving Brock and Dawn slightly bemused about why she hadn't raged when Gary mentioned Ash. Ash returned to his house, where his Pokémon were waiting for him. As he did every day, he released the Pokémon he had been carrying with him, then went to make food for the rest. Once he had done so, he began to meditate whilst the Pokémon ate. After which they went for their usual run, and then began to train against each other. As Ash finished his meditation, his Pokémon finished their training, and went to rest. However, one Pokémon didn't rest with the other Pokémon. Espeon had followed him into his house, and curled up next to him, looking into his eyes and mewing softly. Her mind reached out and linked to her master's, releasing a soothing aura into his mind calmed by his meditation. Ash began to slide her gently, causing her to purr before he started to talk. 7 years since I left them, Espeon. 7 years, and within days of my return I have to face one of my old friends in battle. Worse, I have to investigate her for Pokémon abuse. She will be fine, there is no history in her files. I'll talk to her and then restore her license unless something comes up. You know she's got stronger. Sharpedo was surprised at the strength of her team. If she was anybody else I would accept her as a student. But I can't. Not one of my old friends, I left them behind all those years ago, to reach my dream. Espeon cut through his rambling by nudging his arm, causing Ash to chuckle. He felt a question form in the mental connection, prodding him. A deeper reason? Maybe. The Pokémon that left. If they returned to Pallet, I would struggle to face them, and my friends would have them. Even Pikachu. At this the usually unflappable trainer fell silent, his thoughts melancholy with the emotion of the loss. Espeon nudged him again, breaking that train of thought. That day was etched into the Sun Pokémon's memory. She had never seen anything as broken as her master was as his companion from the start left. As Ash started meditating once again to calm himself, Espeon let her mind wander back to that day. The day Pikachu left. The day something broke in her master. Even if it hadn't been traumatic, Espeon would have remembered it for the simple reason it was also the day she evolved. Flashback. Eevee arched her back as she stretched after the run. It had been the longest one yet, nearly 12 miles long. She had only been with her trainer for a few weeks, with him saving her life and letting her stay with him. When he had offered to train her, she had made a promise to herself never to fail him. She owed her master and would repay it. She just hadn't expected it to start so hard. His training was exhausting. She heard Totodile and Bulbasaur complaining as they finished the run, talking about following the others. Torkoal was the first, having left only a few days after Eevee arrived. She never got to know the coal Pokémon. Then it was Kingler. Glalie, Donphan, Noctowl and Torterra followed over the weeks. Now there were more planning on going. Eevee felt sorry for her trainer, his companion slowly abandoning him. She heard him call out, and turned her head to see Pikachu finishing his run with Ash striding towards him. There was a rumor among the Pokémon that Pikachu was considering leaving. The others had been allowed to go, with Ash not wanting to push any of his friends too hard, and the mouse Pokémon was supposedly tired of the intense training. As the little electric rodent saw his trainer coming towards him and turned to move away. As Ash got near, Pikachu moved further away, causing Ash to stop and turn away again. He moved to the next part of the day's training, head bowed to hide his face. However, Eevee had seen the hurt written there. At the end of the day's training in the early afternoon, done so that the Pokémon weren't always training and so that Ash could lengthen their training as time went on, Ash was still sat meditating, when Pikachu walked up to him. Ash's eyes snapped open, and he let Pikachu sit next to him. Eevee was sat eating with Bayleaf, the grass type having taken a shine to the little evolution Pokémon. Eevee looked up and saw Pikachu gesturing to Ash. "V," she muttered to Bayleaf, causing the latter's head to snap up. They watched in silence as the gestures became more exaggerated, and the realization began to dawn on Ash. He held up a hand to silence Pikachu. The two Pokémon could see his lips move, but couldn't hear what he said. Ash then got up and strode away from the group. Pikachu turned back, going to his bowl and picked some food out. Ash didn't return for nearly an hour. When he did, there was something different. Both of his eyes were dark, nothing showing in them at all. He approached his Pokémon and raised his voice so they could all hear, the emotion clearly audible. Pikachu wants to leave. He feels the training is too tough for him, and knowing it will only get harder, he doesn't want to stay and endure it. He, like the others, has decided to leave. Now, when we first got here, I stood here and told you what we were doing. As a team, you all agreed. It has been 4 months since we started here. Since we got here, I have committed myself to training both myself and you. Some of you think I have lost my younger self, am more reserved, and colder. To you I say, remember our defeat. We knocked out 2 of his Pokémon. 5 years training made a mockery of. That is why I came out here to train, to get stronger. However, I will now ask you the same question I did at the start. You have seen what you're going to go through. I will be with you every step of the way, but if for any reason you feel unable to complete this, please step forward now. I will permit you to leave. However, if you stay, I want this to be a commitment that you will be with me to the end. Take your time, make this decision. If you leave, I will not remember that you left. I will remember all the work you've done in the last 5 years, and I will remember you. Ash turned and walked away again, adopting a meditation position some 30 meters away. The Pokémon all looked at each other in shock, Pikachu the center of attention as they tried to work out what he meant. EVV walked away from the group, to watch from a distance. Her decision was easy, she would stay. Looking back over the group, she guessed a few that would stay. Charizard was a given, he had already stomped away from the rest of the Pokémon. She suspected Bayleaf wouldn't leave her beloved trainer. The rest, she was unsure. As time went on, she realized just how few were actually staying. And when they stood on the hill watching as almost every Pokémon Ash owned left him, she saw him crying. As her heart went out to her master, she felt a rush of power inside her. She began to glow white, causing her trainer to drop to his knee next to her. Under his cold, empty eyes she evolved into Espeon, shortly before the sun set. Ash looked at her, and saw determination in her eyes, determination to succeed and make him proud. When he looked back over the departing Pokémon, being led away by his first partner, he no longer felt the loss. He would miss Pikachu, but he had a team of Pokémon that he would still love. And his right eye suddenly lit up, showing energy in it once again. End flashback. Espeon turned her mind back to her master, whom she was still curled up against. Since that day she had rapidly become the Pokémon he was closest to. She had taught herself how to link to his mind to give a method of communication, and over the years she had always been the one that he turned to when he needed comfort. She reflected that she had taken on the role of Pikachu, although not replaced the electric type in her master's heart. Regardless, she knew she had at least managed to drive him away from the pit of despair he nearly sank into. On the day of departure she had sworn to protect him. She blamed Pikachu for the changes in Ash, but she was still happy. Suddenly she was snapped out of her thoughts by him moving away. As he left the sofa he turned back and said a mere 2 words. "Thank you." And he walked away. "Hello, I'm Misty Waterflower, I have an appointment with the Pokémon Master." Misty was somewhat nervous, standing in front of the receptionist's desk at the Indigo Plateau. She knew the importance of this interview, if she failed to impress, she could have her training license revoked. "Yes, Miss Waterflower. The license review. If you or your friends take the elevator up to the 12th floor, you will be met there." "Thank you." Misty led Brock, James, Dawn and Gary towards the lift. Pikachu sat on her shoulder. As the elevator moved up, there was silence. Stepping out onto the specified floor, there was a corridor with a door at the end. Halfway down was an area with a series of chairs in, clearly a waiting area. As they began to move down the corridor, a voice was heard, although it wasn't clear where it was coming from. "Gary Oak, please enter through the door at the end. Everybody else, please wait in the waiting area." Gary looked at the rest, his eyebrows raised. The rest of the group did as ordered, leaving Gary to the 15-meter walk alone. As he neared the door it opened, revealing the office inside. He stepped through, noting the simplicity inside. There was a large desk with a computer on it. A pile of folders lay next to a telephone and there was a chair either side of the desk. The lack of decorations added to the simplicity of the room, as well as its imposing nature. There was nowhere to hide here. The man behind the desk was wearing black once again, dressed in the clothes that were becoming his trademark as Pokémon Master. Black boots, trousers, shirt and jacket. A hat once again covered his eyes, leaving his face hidden in shadow. He had a presence that intimidated Gary. He gestured for Gary to take a seat opposite him, and the young researcher obliged. "So, why is Miss Waterflower innocent? I presume you have something to tell me." Gary was slightly taken aback at the direct question, but quickly launched into his story. "I have known Misty for 12 years, with her originally traveling with a rival of mine. In the time I've known her I have never seen her do anything against Pokémon. Recently I have started helping her train, so that she can be stronger. When she trains her Pokémon she never pushes them too hard. She frequently visits my grandfather's lab in Pallet, and he checks over her Pokémon, pronouncing them to be in extremely good health. I have a letter from him confirming this." Gary pulled out the letter, and handed it over. Champion took it, opened it and glanced down it. He turned back to Gary. "He says that the Pokémon are fit and healthy. However, as the Cerulean gym leader for most of her career, she may not have had to push them. They only get hurt when she has to. No. She would never hurt her Pokémon. She hurt her Golduck when she faced me. How do you know she didn't do it at other times on her 14 months traveling?" Gary was about to protest that she hadn't, but then he realized he didn't know. He knew in his heart that Misty was innocent, but the questions he was asked made him realize how hard it was going to be to prove it. He had seen Misty with Ash, and the concern she showed then but. "Do you have anything else to add?" Gary bowed his head, feeling sick to his stomach as he muttered. "No." In the waiting area there was a tense silence as they waited for the results of Gary's interview. Suddenly the voice echoed out once again. "Dawn Hikari, please enter through the door at the end." Dawn paled suddenly, and looked terribly nervous. Before she could go anywhere she felt a hand on her arm. James was smiling at her, a warm smile that gave her confidence. She moved with more confidence as she headed towards the door, but she saw Gary coming out looking terrible. He had only been there for 5 minutes, but he looked like he had just run a marathon. He sat back down next to Misty and leaned back in his chair looking at the ceiling. Dawn turned and headed in. "So, Miss Hikari, your evidence." "In the time I've known Misty I've worked very closely with her, improving both my style and hers. This has been going on for the last 5 years. In that time my Piplup has gotten very close to many of her Pokémon. As a result, I feel you should ask him how he feels Misty treats Pokémon." Dawn held up the Pokeball of her starter, and released him. The penguin Pokémon landed on the desk, looking up at the man in front of him. He began to chatter quickly, before Champion held up a hand. He leaned forward to look Piplup in the eyes, and then gestured for Piplup to continue. At the end of the stream of chatter, he leaned back in his chair. Then still focused on the penguin he started to ask questions. Training length and exertion in a day. Piplup, Piplup. Break time. Piplup. Diet. Lup. Where does she get it from? Lup, Piplup. Thank you Piplup. He turned his attention back to Dawn. Anything else? Dawn was staring at him. Can you understand Pokémon? Pretty much. It's in their expressions. Do you have anything else to add? No. James was next to go in, with Dawn looking happier than Gary had, although shaken. As he sat down, he was greeted the same question as the other two. Your evidence. You may be aware that I used to be a member of Team Rocket. Champion nodded. I'm not proud of it, but for a long time my mission was to try and steal a particular Pokémon owned by a traveling companion of hers, Ash Ketchum. In the time that she traveled with him, she fought against us tooth and nail when we tried to steal Pokémon. A memory that I recall with particular clarity was in the Orange Islands. I was trying to get hold of some salvia weed for a teammate of mine who had been hit by stun spore. I tried to attack a Poliwag to persuade it to help me get some, but Misty stepped in. As far as I'm aware, she hadn't a reason to defend the Pokémon, but she did anyway, despite the fact that her friends were also in danger from the stun spore. It was a selfless act made even better by the fact that she gave me some of the weed she had already collected. In fact, as far as I'm aware, that Poliwag trusted her so quickly that it is still part of her team. So she had a reason to fight for it. I wouldn't have said that at the time. She would always fight for any Pokémon we were attacking, regardless of the circumstances. This is just the one I remember the best. Fine. Anything else? James couldn't help but think that his interviewer wasn't really convincing the Pokémon Master. However, they had all planned something to say and he had said his bit. So, hoping it had been enough, nodded, and stood to leave. I've known Misty for a long time. I've always wanted to be a breeder, and I looked after her Pokémon when they were injured. Now I'm a doctor and I regularly check on her Pokémon for her. I can promise you that they are healthy. It was Brock's turn, and although he was intimidated by the Pokémon Master, but like the rest he refused to let it show. I will examine them myself, although your opinion is interesting. You would say she is a close friend? Closest. So forgive me if I don't trust your opinion. I suspect you would do anything for her, and lying to me would be one small thing. What? I wouldn't lie. I'm just stating a possibility. You have given me a testimony that is hard to prove or disprove. Therefore, whilst I will take it into account, I cannot make my decision based on it. I will do it on evidence. Do you have any of that to offer? Aside from my professional opinion on the state of her Pokémon, no I don't. Miss Waterflower. You're the one overseeing this, was all Misty could stutter out. It certainly explained why all her friends had seemed totally drained when they got out. She knew firsthand how intense he was. I was the one who observed the event. How long till you make a decision? Soon. Talk me through battle against me where Golduck went too far. I have had Golduck since it was a Psyduck. Back then it was a Pokémon that was stubborn, couldn't swim, and had a constant headache. However, after many years of working with him, he evolved into Golduck. However, he maintained his stubborn streak. Before I gave up my position as the Cerulean gym leader, I spoke to all my Pokémon, let them know what I was planning and seeing if they agreed. They did. All the training I did between now and then was what we had agreed on. The night before our battle I spoke to them once again, explaining what the opportunity was. I told them that if we were strong enough you might train us. They liked the idea, and they had promised to give it their all. They fought well against your Sharpedo, but were outclassed, I will admit that. Golduck has always had phenomenal endurance, and when he saw the scoreboard he realized that not a single one of your Pokémon had been beaten, and the one he faced didn't look like it had beaten 5 opponents already. He wanted to give it his all. I thought about recalling him after the Giga Impact, but I thought I still had a chance to impress you with his endurance. He was able to still battle at that point. When he was hit by Hyper Beam, I thought about recalling him. However, he wanted to continue, determined to climb back to his feet. The attack that finished him was his own. When I asked him if he could carry on, I wasn't expecting him to fire his own Hyper Beam. I should have recalled him, but he was refusing to lie down. I was angry at getting thrashed, so I wasn't thinking clearly. So it was anger on your part, coupled with loyalty from Golduck. Yes. Champion stared at Misty for a moment, before turning to a file on his desk. He opened it and slid it over to Misty. She looked down at the top page, before turning back to him. What is this? It looks like a record from a hospital. It is. Cerulean Hospital. These are records from 7 years ago. Each of these Pokémon were in critical care. The reason for each was a battle at the Cerulean gym. Explain. Misty looked back down, thoroughly alarmed. It was true. There was 19 Pokémon here, all who ended up in critical care over a 6-month PRD, all having been beaten by her. She had been furious when she heard about Ash's disappearance and she had taken it out on her challengers. The worst ones had been the slightly arrogant ones, or ones that tried to beat her using Pokémon who were weak against water types. They reminded her of the friend that had vanished without telling anybody where he was going, and she let her Pokémon go all out. Gyarados had personally put over half in hospital. However, this wasn't helping her case. Before this PRD started, a friend of mine vanished. He had just lost a battle in the Sinnoh League and he was bitterly disappointed. He had come home, but I could tell that something was wrong with him. I wanted to take time off from the gym to stay with him, but he insisted that I went back, saying that he would come and visit me soon. 2 days later he vanished, taking all his Pokémon and leaving a message explaining that he was leaving to train. I blamed myself for his departure and began to take it out on my opponents, especially any that reminded me of him. After a few months I sought some help and calmed down, no longer doing it to anybody else. So once again your anger got the better of you? I suppose so. The file was withdrawn and replaced by another. Misty looked at it and her heart skipped a beat. It was titled Cherisific Valley. She had gone there at the start of her training journey, to have her Pokémon practice facing fire types. She had been beaten by enough to know that she couldn't just assume that she could win by using a water type, and so had gone to train against the Charizard there. Liza had been interested by the idea and had asked the Charizard there if they were willing to do so. They had been, but as her team got stronger they had finally faced one of the strongest Charizard in the valley and had slaughtered him. A few of the other Charizard had tried to support the one that Misty had fought, but her team was too strong. With the type advantage, she had wiped the floor with them and caused some serious injuries. She then tried to help treat them but was attacked. Finally Liza took her out of the valley. Evidently he had found out about this particular event. Misty explained this to her interviewer, and was greeted with a nod from Champion. 3 more files came, each on a time when Misty had caused Pokémon to be hurt at various times over the years. Each time she explained it, and was greeted by a nod. At the end of the files, Misty felt drained. She hadn't expected him to be able to find out all these things about her. However, the 6th file shocked her the most. It was titled Shamudi Island. Care to explain what happened here? Champion asked. The friend who left, his name was Ash Ketchum. He was made the chosen one for a ritual on Shamudi, but a Pokémon collector, Lawrence III, tried to capture the legendary birds Moltres, Zapdos, and Articuno. He wanted them to force another Pokémon, Lugia, out so he could capture it. I helped Ash fight against Lawrence, and eventually restore the balance. This was greeted with a nod by Champion, who then took the file back, placing it on the pile, before looking back to Misty and asking his last question. Do you have anything to add? Misty was about to shake her head, but then she remembered something. I have a Pokémon with me, that isn't mine. He belonged to Ash, but he came back 4 months after Ash vanished. After a few days he came to spend time with me. And I looked after him. He is in excellent health, and I thought I could show him to you as proof that I look after other Pokémon. No. He was the Pokémon of a close friend, so you would obviously treat him well. Having traveled with him, I would be shocked if you didn't. But he came all this way, and I don't want to disappoint him. I would probably regret it. Very well. I'll call him. There followed a few seconds silence before the door swung open and a yellow mouse darted in. He leaped up onto Misty's shoulder and looked questioningly at her. Misty gestured to Champion, who sat in shock as he saw his partner once again. For once he was unable to speak. The little mouse looked at him, but Ash no longer smelled like he did. Over the years his smell had changed, and without being able to see his eyes, Pikachu had no way of telling that this tall imposing man was the same as the kind-hearted trainer he had loved. So he obediently hopped onto the desk and presented himself for inspection. Recovering, Champion leaned forward in his chair to look at the Pokémon, before turning back to Misty, grateful for the changes in his voice that hid his identity. He is very healthy. Appears to be stronger than most Pikachu. Look after him. He then walked to a door set in a different wall to the one that Misty had come through. It led to a flight of stairs, which he gestured to. Misty followed him down the stairs, and was surprised when it opened out into a large training area. She was led over to a pool, where it was obvious water Pokémon would train. Champion turned to her. Release your Pokémon. Misty took out 5 Pokeballs and threw them, allowing her Pokémon to appear. Gyarados came out with his usual roar, which he rapidly subdued once he realized what situation they were in. Before Misty could talk to them, Champion's voice rang out. Line up. I need to inspect you. They did as ordered, and Champion walked along in front of each of them, looking carefully at each one, as well as using his aura to inspect them. As he passed Dugong on the end, he turned back to Misty. You may recall them. He then turned and strode back towards his office, Misty hurrying to recall her Pokémon then follow him. As they reached the office, sat behind his desk and returned to his computer, typing quickly. As he finished, Misty heard a ping from her Pokédex. She took it out and looked at it, Pikachu peering over her shoulder to see the screen. License restored to full status. An official warning has been attached. Misty breathed out, feeling tension leave her. Champion held out his hand, with a Pokeball in it. Golduck. He is, like the rest of your Pokémon, very strong. Look after them, Miss Waterflower. Misty took the Pokeball, still in a trance, not believing that it had happened so quickly. She was clear. The warning was fair, and she could go and train. Behind her the door swung open, and Champion stood up, holding his hand out again. Misty took it, and turned to leave, suddenly turning back. Thank you. For the speed which you came to a decision. And for a fair hearing. Though I confess, I was surprised at your questions, you researched me thoroughly. It's my job, Miss Waterflower. But thank you nonetheless. And Misty turned and headed down the corridor to tell her friends the good news. She was congratulated, with Dawn in particular being emotional, and they all headed back to Pallet Town. It wasn't agreed on, but somehow nobody felt quite up to discussing the events in their individual interviews, as the questioner dissected their arguments and made them question their judgments. Everybody was wondering why she was acquitted, but Misty suspected she knew. The questions she had been asked in her interview made her realize how well she had been researched. The Pokémon Master was just making sure she was what everybody said she was. It has been a month since the new Pokémon Master was crowned, and he has completed 2 obligatory months battling anybody who wishes to test themselves. There has been a record low number of challengers, with only 4 trainers testing themselves. Now we wait to see what the Master, known only as Champion, will do. He promised a review of all the gyms, so that is expected, but the only thing that can be truly said about Champion is that he does the unpredictable. Samuel Fernandez turned off the TV, before dashing downstairs. As he reached the bottom he jumped, sliding in his socked feet across the wooden floor, coming to a stop right next to the table in the kitchen. His father looked up from the paper he was reading. Sam, don't do that, you'll fall and hurt yourself. Let him be Dennis, you know how excited he is today. Dennis Fernandez looked across the room to where his wife was cooking a breakfast. Today was their son's 10th birthday, which means that he would be able to go to Professor Elm's laboratory in New Bark Town and pick a starter Pokémon. As Sam wolfed down his breakfast, his parents watched him fondly. He had been looking forward to this day for months, and they were proud to watch him. He hadn't been entirely sure what he would do in his career, but a month earlier he had been inspired to become a battler by the new Pokémon Master. It was amusing when they thought about it that his journey would start on the day that his idol would finally start in his role after the obligatory month of battling. After he had finished his breakfast, Sam grabbed his bag and said goodbye to his parents. Outside he started to walk towards Professor Elm's lab. He had only gone a couple of streets when a figure slammed into him from the side. Sam was knocked off his feet into a grassy area to the side of the road, with the figure lying on top of him. Groaning, Sam looked into a pair of green eyes. Pushing the figure off, he rolled to his feet and held out a hand to his childhood friend Melanie Rigger. She grinned up at him, before taking his hand and allowing herself to be pulled to her feet. "Did you really have to do that, Melanie? Just wanted an exciting way to say hello. So you sent me flying." "Real mature," said Sam, sticking his tongue out as he brushed his black hair out of his eyes. "Coming from you?" Melanie retorted. They held each other's gaze for a moment before bursting into giggles. "Come on," Melanie said, grabbing Sam's hand. "Let's go get our starters." As the young girl dragged the poor boy towards the lab, they saw a large red dragon race over their head. They stopped and stared in awe at the Pokémon as it vanished over the hill. Melanie turned to Sam. "Isn't the lab over that hill? That Pokémon couldn't be headed there, could it?" Sam gasped as a memory hit him. "That Pokémon. It reminds me of one that Champion had." Ignoring his companion's groan, Sam pressed on. "It's a Charizard, the evolution of a Kanto starter. Its owner must be a powerful trainer. I'd love to meet him." "You think a powerful trainer would talk to a newbie like you?" Melanie teased. "I mean, you don't even have a Pokémon yet." "Neither do you," retaliated Sam. "Anyway, I'm going to be a better trainer than you." "You wish," Melanie grinned, before skipping away up the road again. "Anyway, hurry up or he'll be gone, if he really did land at the lab." She burst out laughing as Sam suddenly started sprinting after her. Charizard landed in the fields outside the laboratory, and a figure dressed in black slid off his back. He patted the dragon's snout before holding out a Pokeball, and returning the flame Pokémon. He strode to the entrance of the lab, letting himself in. As he entered, he stopped and looked around the room, observing the mess. He began to wander through, looking at some of the files that had been left lying around, before finally finding Professor Elm, his head buried in yet another pile of paper. The man coughed, causing Professor Elm to wave his hand dismissively. Hidden by his hat, the figure's eyebrow raised in surprise. He turned and began to walk back through the lab, letting himself through a door before he stopped once again. In front of him were 3 small Pokémon that he recognized. A Cyndaquil, a Totodile and a Chikorita. The man observed them, noting their health. He reached into a pocket inside his jacket and took out some food, which he threw to the 3 Pokémon. He watched with an amused eye as they sniffed it before tasting it, then devouring what he had given them. The Chikorita ran towards him, using its leaf to rub against the man's leg, with the Cyndaquil nudging the other leg. The Totodile watched him slightly more reserved than the other 2. The man then gestured to the door, and turned to walk back through it. He strode back through the lab, the 3 Pokémon following him, till they were outside. When outside he took the Pokémon to the side, around the corner, knelt and started to question them about their care when they were at the laboratory. When Sam and Melanie finally reached the lab, they hurried to the door, not seeing the man around the corner. They went inside, and after some effort, finally managed to get Professor Elm's attention. However, when they were shown to where their new Pokémon were waiting, they were surprised to see 3 empty Pokeballs. The professor, having tried to release all 3, was at a loss, and the 2 youngsters were beginning to realize that they wouldn't be able to start their journeys when they heard a voice behind them. "Trainers will soon take you away from here. As for your treatment, I know the professor has good intentions, he just gets very easily distracted. He will improve on this, or he will be replaced." Professor Elm gulped. There was only one professor around, and getting distracted sounded very much like him. He, Sam and Melanie turned towards the door, which slid open as Ash strode through, talking over his shoulder to the 3 Pokémon behind him. Squeals of delight came from the 2 youngsters, as they saw the Pokémon that they would be receiving, but as Sam began to move forward to get a closer look, a cold voice stopped him, very different from the caring voice they had heard a moment before. Wait. Ash moved past the stunned trio, before picking up the 3 Pokeballs, and returning each of the Johto starters. He then turned to Professor Elm, and gave a simple command. Get the Pokédexes. As the professor, realizing that he was in serious trouble, hurried to do as ordered by the Pokémon Master, Ash turned to the youngsters. Here to get starter Pokémon? They both nodded, in awe of the man who by now they had both also recognized. Very well. Since Professor Elm is busy, I will issue you with them. There are 3, Cyndaquil, the fire type, Totodile the water type, or Chikorita, the grass type. Do you know which you want? Melanie nervously stepped forward. I would like Totodile, please, sir. Sam was still shell-shocked, and wasn't responding even when nudged by Melanie. Ash looked at him, before handing a Pokeball to Melanie, and releasing the 2 Pokémon held in the other 2. Cyndaquil looked at Sam and then back at Ash before sitting down to watch his potential new trainer. Chikorita hid behind Ash's leg. The sight of the 2 Pokémon shook Sam, and he knelt next to Cyndaquil. The fire type accepted his petting, before nuzzling his new trainer. Wordlessly, Ash returned Chikorita and then handed Cyndaquil's Pokeball to Sam. As he did so, Professor Elm came rushing back in with a pair of Pokédexes. Ash gestured for him to give them to the new trainers, and stepped back. These are your Pokédexes. Professor Elm started. They will be able to give you information on any Pokémon you see, as well as being your licenses to show you are allowed to capture and train Pokémon. Don't lose them. Sam and Melanie nodded, still in awe of seeing the Pokémon Master. Professor Elm then handed them 5 Pokeballs each. These are Pokeballs, they hold Pokémon. Your Cyndaquil and Totodile have their own Pokeballs. Any questions before you head on your way? This time the 2 new trainers shook their heads. Good. In that case, I suggest you head on your way, and if you have any trouble please call the lab. As the 2 trainers started to leave, Sam summoned up his courage before turning back to Ash. Sir, can I have your autograph? Ash just looked at the new trainer, causing him to stutter on. I mean that I'm a fan, I watched all your battles and... What did I say in my inauguration speech? You said that if any trainers felt they were among the best worldwide you would train them, and you would restructure the Pokémon League, encouraging the gym leaders to take a more active role in training new trainers. What was the 4th Pokémon my 3rd challenger used? He used a Fiero, but it was defeated by your Charizard. Do you have nothing better to do with your life? Seeing how Sam was getting his questions answered, Melanie stepped in. It's true, sir, he talks about nothing else, and hasn't done for a month now. Unfortunately, I don't do autographs. However, I will have you watched whilst you journey. If you are strong enough, you will be invited to train with some very powerful trainers. I sense potential in you, I urge you to fulfill it. Ash then turned and strode out of the room, deeper into the Pokémon laboratory, leaving Professor Elm to show the 2 trainers out. Once they had left, the professor walked back into the lab to talk to his renowned guest. He found Champion reading a report that had been left on a desk. As he came in, Champion put the report down and turned to the professor. This will be brief, Professor Elm. I am reviewing the roles of everybody affiliated with the Pokémon League. Since I got here I have been disappointed with what I have seen. You are a researcher, but you are also responsible for the trainers who are based in the Johto region. Whilst I do not doubt your research credentials, but your ability to organize the trainers of this region is lacking. The fact that you failed to notice the Pokémon in your care leaving suggests that you are not able to focus sufficiently on them. If this was a first offense I would consider overlooking it, but it is not. As a result, you are hereby replaced as the presiding researcher of the Johto region, effective immediately. This laboratory is the property of the Pokémon League, and as such will be required for your replacement. You will be expected to have vacated the premises within 3 days. The Pokémon currently under your care will be sent to a center until your replacement moves in. Champion turned on his heel and strode out of the lab, leaving Professor Elm to recover from what just happened. As the words of the Pokémon Master hit him, he sunk to his knees, before turning to the laboratory. He now had to start clearing his belongings out, and find out who his replacement was so he could try to use their lab when they took his. Cynthia noticed a message appearing on her computer as she got into work. It was the first day after Champion had departed on his tour of the regions to review the various members of the Pokémon League. The message was surprisingly from her boss. Cynthia opened it, scanned it and froze. The message was simple, only a single line. Inform Professor Rose that she is Professor Elm's replacement. Effective immediately. Cynthia hadn't expected such rapid results from his review, but having known Professor Elm she wasn't surprised that he was the first casualty. She picked up her phone, and called Professor Rose, a young and upcoming professor that she got on very well with. As she did so she wondered if her relationship with Rose was the reason for her selection. She had certainly topped the shortlist that she had provided Champion, the Pokémon Master having asked for a list of trainers who could take over a gym of any type as well as professors that could manage a region. Cynthia was snapped back to the present by the sound of her friend's voice in her ear. Hello? Rose? How do you fancy a change of scene? Pidgeot, Aerial Ace. Snub Bull, take down. The bird Pokémon swerved around the charging Bulldog, and then caught it on its side. Snub Bull was sent skidding across the field, and before its trainer could give another order, gym leader Faulkner gave his last order. Hyper Beam. Pidgeot swooped around, before firing an orange beam out of its beak, which caught Snub Bull, knocking him out in a large explosion. Faulkner recalled his Pokémon, and walked across the field to shake his opponent's hand. That was a good battle. You are a powerful trainer. Not good enough to defeat you though, the defeated trainer said sullenly. Faulkner laughed. Kid, I've been training for more than a decade. I also train a whole cadre of flying Pokémon trainers. There is nothing about them I don't know. You are young, you'll beat me eventually. I used my most powerful Pokémon against you, and you still nearly won. Not all trainers face these. When you win your Zephyr badge it will mean even more. As the trainer left, Faulkner stood on the gym roof, where the battlefield was, looking out over Violet City. He turned to go back inside, but there was a man leaning on a wall. Faulkner instantly recognized Champion, the man who was the Pokémon Master. He strolled across the gym field, to lean on the wall next to the Champion, before turning to him and asking him the obvious question. The review? Champion merely nodded, before handing the gym leader a piece of paper. It had various categories marked on it. Faulkner read down it, before realizing that the Pokémon Master had been in his gym for some time. Battling, pass. Teaching, pass. Overall, pass. The gym leader turned back to the Pokémon Master who was watching him. So I pass. Yes. Your record as a gym leader is exceptional and your cadre of trainees are of a high standard. What I have seen today is confirmation of that. What now? Carry on. You shouldn't see me again. As he finished speaking, a large red Pokémon landed next to the Champion, who swung up around the creature's neck. The Charizard took to the sky, heading in the direction of Azalea Town. Over the next week, the remaining Johto leaders were reviewed. Bugsy passed with flying colors, as did Morty, Chuck, Jasmine and Claire. However, 2 of the Johto leaders had issues. Neither Whitney nor Price taught trainers. As a result, they both failed their leader reviews, and were replaced by leaders from Cynthia's shortlist. Neither leader had taken it particularly well, but their pleas had fallen on deaf ears. Champion refused to listen to pleas, and merely ordered them out of their gyms, so that their replacements could move in without upsetting any trainers who wished to challenge for the badges. Whitney had been the first to be replaced. She had been tearful when ordered out, but had eventually been forced to move back to the Miltank farm outside Goldenrod City. However bad her reaction was, compared to Price it was very subdued. When the champion told Price that he was expected to pass on his experience, and his failure to do so discounted him from being a gym leader, he had flown into a rage. Shouting at the Pokémon Master, he had claimed that he would never be moved from his gym, having given his life to it. What had followed had terrified passers-by. "I will never be thrown out of my gym. This is my life, my everything." It was. "Now you are being replaced. You have no right." "Wrong. I have the right." Price had been arguing with the stubborn Pokémon Master for nearly 15 minutes, but he had made no progress. Realizing that he wouldn't win the argument, he turned back into his gym and slammed the door, shouting through it that he would never give up. Champion hadn't bothered to respond, merely striding to the doors and pulling on them, to confirm that they were locked. By this point a news crew had arrived and were filming everything. In front of the world, Champion's Charizard forcibly opened the doors to the gym, before picking up Price and carrying him out. The ex-gym leader was deposited on the ground outside his gym, where he was about to stand up before the dark figure of the Pokémon Master stood over him. "Price. By the power invested in me as Pokémon Master, I hereby remove you from the rank of gym leader. Your refusal to cooperate means that I have no choice but to ban you from any future affiliation with the Pokémon League. Do not attempt to enter this gym again, it no longer belongs to you." With that, Champion had recalled his Charizard and strode away, leaving Price to contemplate the ruins of his career. The news crew had tried to get an interview from both men, but Price ignored them, and Champion had gone. Back in Kanto, Misty was spending a few days with Brock in Pewter City before returning to training. They had been watching the news when they saw Price being removed. They were absolutely shocked at the cruel nature of the Champion, his lack of remorse as he removed a man who had devoted his life to his gym. Their reaction was one mirrored across the Pokémon world. Whilst Champion was technically working within his remit, he was taking it to an extreme. He had promised reviews of all gym leaders. Both Brock and Misty feared for the gyms that they were affiliated with, as Brock's father Flint had remained the Pewter City gym leader whilst Daisy had taken over being the Cerulean City gym leader when Misty had wanted to tour the world. Neither gym had any trainees there at all, and as a result, the leaders could be thrown out just as Price had been. They both began to work on ways to avoid such a calamity. Sam and Melanie had reached Violet City, where they intended to battle against Faulkner. Sam had chosen to go first, and whilst Faulkner had easily defeated his Sentret, but had struggled against the ghastly Sent-Out, and then Sam Cyndaquil had defeated Faulkner's Pidgeotto, winning the 3-on-3 match. Melanie had offered to give Faulkner a day to recover from the battle, which he had accepted, so the two trainers were returning to the gym the following day in order for Melanie to try to win the Zephyr badge. Faulkner met them both on the roof, shaking Melanie's hand before showing her to the field. They took their places, with Faulkner choosing his Pokémon first. "Hoot Hoot, you're up. Poliwag, come on out. Hoot Hoot, Peck. Poliwag, Bubble." Hoot Hoot swept down, but was forced back into the sky by bubbles from Poliwag. The owl Pokémon tried twice more, but each time was forced back into the sky, causing Faulkner to change his strategy. Hoot Hoot, confusion. Poliwag, dodge. Hoot Hoot's eyes glowed, and he fired waves of attacks at Poliwag, who succeeded in dodging them all. Faulkner was starting to get irritated, whilst Sam was trying not to grin at watching his friend's style. Hoot Hoot, air slash. Hoot Hoot charged in with another attack, determined to make sure this didn't miss, but Melanie was ready for it. Poliwag, bubble beam. As the owl Pokémon came near, it was caught in a stream of bubbles that forced it to the ground. Before it could recover, Poliwag was on it, beginning a vicious double slap attack. Hoot Hoot finally managed to get away, but not before it had been visibly hurt by the attack, whilst Poliwag remained fresh. Faulkner gritted his teeth in anger, before ordering the next attack. Hoot Hoot, take down. Hoot Hoot went into a steep dive, but as it came close to Poliwag, Melanie gave her final command. Ended with water gun. Unable to dodge at such close range, Hoot Hoot was sent crashing into the ground. As the dust cleared, his eyes were replaced by swirls, leaving Faulkner to return his Pokémon, before replacing it. Instantly. Dodrio, revenge time. Melanie recalled her Poliwag to replace it with Geodude. Faulkner gritted his teeth, knowing that he would be lucky to win this matchup, and another defeat would give Melanie the victory. Dodrio, try attack. Geodude, dodge. Peck. Defense curl. As each of the three heads fired a beam, Geodude merely dropped under them, before curling into a ball to endure the follow-up. Dodrio, fury attack, and don't let up. Geodude, stay curled up. The three-headed bird continued his furious pecking, but was making no progress against the stubborn defense of Geodude. Now fuming at the girl's ability to counter his every move, Faulkner pressed for an attack that would actually do some damage. Dodrio, drill peck. Geodude, roll out. As Dodrio stopped its pecking, its three beaks began to spin rapidly. However, as it struck forward, it found its target had rolled away. As Dodrio began to chase after it, Geodude doubled back round and smashed into Dodrio, sending it skidding back across the field. As Dodrio recovered, Geodude smashed into him once again, and again. After the fourth collision, Dodrio failed to get up, and Geodude stopped his rolling. Faulkner recalled his Dodrio, before stepping out across the field. Winning 2 battles was enough to win the Zephyr badge, and he congratulated Melanie, handing her the badge, before returning into his gym to train. Good win, Melanie. Seriously, that was impressive. Thank you, Sam, responded the girl, smiling at him. They were heading towards the Sprout Tower, something that they both wanted to see before they headed on to Azalea Town. But why didn't you use Totodile? Surely he wanted to fight. He did, but he fought those trainers outside the city. I wanted Poliwag to get some experience, and Geodude was a no-brainer. If either of them lost, Totodile was ready for his last Pokémon. Sam was about to respond when the tower loomed in front of them. Heading through the door, they smiled at the men on the ground floor, before heading up the tower. On the first floor they were stopped by a man who challenged them to a battle. Melanie was about to step forward when she felt a hand on her arm. Sam was smiling at her, holding out a Pokeball. I've got this, Melanie. Another man stepped out next to the first. How about we make it a double battle, the newcomer suggested, holding out his own Pokeball. Very well, Cyndaquil, let's go. Sam said, grinning as his fire starter materialized. Totodile, fight, called Melanie. The two men looked at each other, before releasing a Bellsprout each. Melanie noticed them both watching her and realized that she was about to be targeted. Sam had also realized it, but it made him grin. If they thought they could trap Totodile, they were very much mistaken. He himself had been beaten by Melanie's style of countering opponents. Bellsprout, Vine Whip. Razor Leaf. Totodile, left, then under, followed by Water Gun. Totodile moved as ordered, avoiding the Vine Whip from one Bellsprout, before firing its Water Gun to knock down the leaves of the other. Before the two men could react, Sam jumped in. Cyndaquil, Ember. The Fire Mouse Pokémon fired an Ember attack that smashed into one of the Bellsprout, with the power of it knocking the Flower Pokémon out. Cyndaquil turned its attack on the other Bellsprout, but it managed to dodge, before being caught by a bite attack from Totodile. As it tried to throw the water type away, Cyndaquil fired again, this time catching it and knocking it out. The two men recalled their Pokémon, before stepping into the recesses of the tower wordlessly. Sam and Melanie exchanged glances, before heading further up the tower. They stopped for a short while 2 floors up, watching the swaying of the inside of the tower, before they climbed up one more. As Sam climbed off the stairs with Melanie behind him, He realized that the floor he was on was very dark. He was about to call out his Cyndaquil to give some light when he was grabbed from behind. Melanie screamed, but it was cut off as a hand clamped over her mouth and she was hauled further into the darkness of the tower. In Petalburg City, Caroline Maple picked up the ringing phone. "Hello, Petalburg Gym. Mom. It's me, May. May, it's wonderful to hear from you. To what do I owe this pleasure? Have you seen the news? About Price? Price who, dear? Mom, it's the Pokémon Master. He is removing gym leaders that do not have any trainees at their gym. Leaders who do nothing but work to defend their badge, ignoring the responsibilities that he demands. Gym leaders like Dad. Don't be ridiculous, dear, he can't just remove your father. Mom, he can. Price, a Johto leader, was thrown out of his gym and forbidden from returning. The same could happen to Dad. May, your father is not going to be removed as a gym leader. He is one of the strongest in Hoenn, there is no way he could be replaced. Mom, you don't understand. This man is heartless. He obliterated Misty, and nearly caused her to have her license revoked. Price had his career ended because he opposed his removal. Warn Dad, he needs to get some trainees quickly, or he will be replaced. Caroline put the phone down, not believing the danger. She looked out the window, to see a large red dragon flying towards the gym. Assuming it was a trainer to challenge her husband, she started to cook lunch for after the battle. Charizard flew through the air, before descending to outside the Petalburg gym. Ash slid off his back, landing on his feet just outside before recalling the flame Pokémon. It had been a long time since he had stood here. He knew that the gym before him would not live up to the standards that he demanded, and knew that he would have to remove the Maple family. The Ash of some years ago would have been shocked at such a callous act, but the new Ash merely took it in his stride. Over his 7-year absence he had hardened significantly towards people. The Hoenn gyms were potentially the toughest, yet more than one of them would fail his review because they did not fulfill the criteria. He had reviewed each gym in his month at Indigo Plateau, and he knew which ones would not match up. Ash strode up to the door of the Petalburg gym and swung it open. Inside was normal Maple, having a practice match with his son. Max. Ash stepped in, to watch, as Norman Slaking overpowered the Raticate that the youngest Maple was using. Recalling his beaten Pokémon, Max thanked his father, before heading into the house. Norman recalled Slaking, and was about to follow when a voice stopped him. Gym Leader Norman. You should know why I am here. Spinning around, Norman saw Ash standing in his gym. His eyes widened in surprise, before he thought back to the inauguration speech some weeks ago. As realization hit him, he nodded. A review. I think you will find that my gym record speaks for itself. In that you are correct. However, there are two aspects to my review. Your battling record, and your contribution to teaching new trainers. You are an admirable battler, but you do not teach. Yet with my battling record, surely you could accept that I could change. I have 2 children and have taught both of them. One is now a powerful trainer, the other an admirable coordinator, even if she is taking a break. Your battling is not exceptional. You are not irreplaceable. You will not find a trainer stronger than me. As soon as the words left Norman's mouth, he knew he had made a mistake. The change in the posture of the Pokémon Master was enough to warn him. Nobody stronger than you. Beat me in a 2-on-1 battle, and perhaps I'll believe you. Norman gulped. He may not keep up with all the news, leading a particularly busy life, but he did know that he didn't stand a chance against this man. He didn't know about Price's removal, but he had realized that his job might genuinely be on the line. However, if he backed out, he knew that he would almost certainly be removed, and so he took his place in the gym leader box, before throwing out 2 Pokeballs. Slaking, Vigoroth, Battle Stance. The 2 normal types appeared, one lying on its side, the other dancing around like mad. Ash wordlessly threw a Pokeball towards the field, and a large red dragon appeared with a roar. Ash smirked under his hat, deciding to end the battle as quickly as possible. Flamethrower. Before Norman could react, a torrent of flame raced across the field. Both of his Pokémon were caught in the flames, sending them flying to crash into the wall behind him. Norman looked around in shock as his Pokémon were taken out in a single attack. He looked back at the man in front of him who was recalling his Charizard. You have 3 days to empty the house, Norman. Your replacement will need it. What about my family? Your children have moved out. You and your wife can find somewhere else to live. With that he strode out of the room, leaving Norman to contemplate the loss of his career and his home. Violet City Gym leader Faulkner strode into the Pokémon Center late that evening. He went to the front desk where Nurse Joy was waiting for him, holding a tray containing 3 Pokeballs. He thanked her, took his Pokémon back and was about to leave when he noticed that she looked worried. Turning back, he asked what was wrong. It's these 2 kids, Nurse Joy said. They went to visit the Sprout Tower hours ago, and haven't come back. I normally wouldn't worry, but they are young. Faulkner felt a sinking feeling. Who are they? Melanie Rigger and Samuel Fernandez. They took a room for the night, but it's late, and they aren't back yet and I'm worried about them. I'll go and have a look. The gym leader promised. They've probably just got lost. But even as he said it, he knew that they hadn't. As he left the Pokémon Center he threw a Pokeball, jumping into the air, letting the bird Pokémon catch him on its back. Pidgeot, to the Sprout Tower. As the bird Pokémon reached the tower, Faulkner released his Hoot Hoot to scout around, before landing on the top. Within a few minutes Hoot Hoot had returned, cooing into his trainer's ear. Faulkner jerked around, to stare at his Pokémon who merely nodded. Faulkner threw another Pokeball out, causing his Pidgeotto to appear. Pidgeotto, watch the entrance. If anybody leaves, come and get us. The bird nodded before flying away to watch. Faulkner then turned to Pidgeot. On my command, whirlwind the tower. Faulkner then swung himself off the roof, letting himself drop a short way to a window below, Hoot Hoot clinging onto his shoulder to slow his descent. As he reached the window, he felt Pidgeot grab him as well, keeping him floating there. Faulkner pushed at the window which opened silently, allowing him to land inside. Pidgeot flew away, and Hoot Hoot remained rooted to his trainer's shoulder. Faulkner looked around at the dark insides of the tower, and took another Pokeball in his hand, before stepping forwards deeper inside. Using Hoot Hoot's ability to see in the dark, Faulkner made quick progress through the tower, before he found a door in front of him. He pushed it open, stepping inside and shutting it again behind him. Out cold in front of him, and tied up were 5 young trainers, including the 2 he had been looking for. Before he could do anything to untie them, he heard voices through the door. This one's heavy. We should drag them after we take them nearer, give us less distance to walk. Yeah. Still, got a good haul tonight. 6 trainers in one night, fair few Pokémon taken, dream job. Faulkner stepped back into the shadows, tightening his grip on the Pokeball in one hand, pulling another off his belt with the other. As the door opened, 2 men stepped in, carrying a teenager between them. The 2 men were both dressed in black clothes, each with a large red R on their chest. Team Rocket grunts, though they hadn't been seen for nearly 4 years. As they tossed the boy they'd been carrying into the room, Faulkner stepped forward, throwing his Pokeballs. The first Pokémon had a crest of blue feathers from its head, extending down its back, with red chest feathers. The other had 3 heads, and brown feathers. The 2 grunts jumped back in surprise, reaching for Pokeballs, but Faulkner got there first. Quick attack. Swellow and Dodrio surged forward, crashing into the trainers and sending them into the wall. Faulkner gestured to Swellow who perched herself on the chest of one grunt, glaring at him so he didn't move. Faulkner grabbed the front of the shirt of the other grunt, hauling him up with Dodrio rearing behind him. How many of you are here? The grunt remained silent, causing Dodrio to snap one of its heads forward into the grunt's shoulder. There was a scream from the grunt, before his head was snapped up to look at Faulkner once again. "I'm not asking again, how many are you? Go to hell." Faulkner looked him in the eye, before nodding to Dodrio and stepping back. Each head snapped out once, hitting both legs and then the man's other arm. As he screamed in pain, Faulkner grabbed the front of his shirt again. "I warned you," he dropped the man again, next to his teammate, who still had Swellow on his chest. Faulkner looked him in the eye, before asking him the same question. This time answers were more forthcoming. "There are 9 of us, including us 2. "Where?" "2 downstairs. Anybody that beats them are the ones we want." "What are you doing?" "We get the trainers up here, grab them, take their Pokémon and then drag them. They won't be awake for hours. We'll be gone by then." Faulkner rocked back on his heels, thinking about what he'd heard. He then gestured to Swellow, whose wing hit the edge of the man's head, knocking him out. The gym leader untied the trainers, and used the rope to tie up the 2 grunts, one of whom was still in absolute agony. He then pulled out his final Pokémon, releasing a Starly. He gave the small bird a note and ordered him to take it to Office Jenny. As Starly vanished through the tower, Faulkner sent Hoot Hoot out to find the remaining Team Rocket members. He knew he didn't have long till they noticed the others hadn't come back, even if they hadn't heard the screams. Within minutes Hoot Hoot returned once again, and Faulkner started to run. As he neared a room, Hoot Hoot hooted into his ear. Faulkner nodded, and moved towards it, Dodrio and Swellow on his heels. As he reached the door, he threw it open, taking the 5 Team Rocket members by surprise. Swellow and Dodrio flew straight into the attack, knocking a rocket down each. Each bird then grabbed the trainer's Pokeball belts, relieving them of the Pokémon that they had, leaving him with 3 opponents. As they all pulled out Pokeballs, Faulkner played his ace. Throwing his head back, he shouted as loudly as he could. "Now Pidgeot!" The bird who had kept his ear ped for that shout ever since his trainer entered the building flapped his wings powerfully. The whirlwind attack rocked the tower back and forth, vastly exaggerating the natural swaying, and causing the rockets to stumble. Faulkner, ready for the shaking, darted forward, using the rope he had taken from the other trainers to tie hands behind the rockets' back, whilst his birds took their Pokeballs away from them. Only one of the rockets managed to avoid Faulkner's Pokémon, and had backed up against a wall. He pulled out his Pokeballs, and threw it, revealing Eradicate. Dodrio, Hyper Beam. Before the Eradicate was able to move, all 3 of the Dodrios had fired orange beams at the normal type, knocking it out with a single strike. Swellow surged across the room and used her talons to pin the trainer against the wall, as Faulkner strode across the room. Faulkner tied the final rocket up, and left his Pokémon to watch them. As he went down the 3rd floor, he found his Pidgeot sat with 2 more rockets whom the bird Pokémon had knocked out. Faulkner hauled them up to the top floor to wait for Officer Jenny with the other rockets. After the rockets had been arrested, Faulkner put in a call to the Pokémon League. It was picked up by a receptionist, and he asked to be diverted to the Pokémon Master. Being a gym leader, he was answered a few moments later by Champion. Faulkner proceeded to inform his superior of the resurfacing of Team Rocket, expecting to be ordered to keep watching them, potentially to see if they had a cadre based in Violet City. Instead he was bombarded with questions, regarding how they were discovered, their aims, and how many he had captured. Faulkner answered as many as possible, and then confirmed that they were now in Officer Jenny's custody, so could be questioned further there. As the call ended, he returned to the Pokémon Center to visit the trainers that he had rescued, thinking about the degree of interest that the Pokémon Master was taking in the resurgence of Team Rocket. He hadn't expected such an immediate response. As he reached the center, he pushed his thoughts to the back of his mind and strode through the doors. Pokémon Master, Champion, has completed the first 3 regions of his review of the Pokémon League. He has replaced 9 out of the 24 gym leaders in Johto, Hoenn and Sinnoh, as well as replacing Professor Elm, the active researcher for Johto. Whilst his actions have been met with approval in the respect of improving the league, his methods are coming under question for being excessively harsh. The replacement of Gym Leader Price of Mahogany Town Gym in particular is coming under intense criticism for his forcible removal. Furthermore, the lack of notice being given leaves the replaced gym leaders with few places to go. They are apparently being forced to rely on friends and family until they can sort themselves out. Gym leader Norman Maple of Petalburg Gym, another replaced leader, spoke of how he was ordered out of his home and had to move to a different region to stay with a family friend that has space. Ex-Pokémon Master, Cynthia Sharona refused to comment on her successor's actions, although the fact that she now works at the Indigo Plateau implies a degree of agreement with Champion's actions. The last league to review is Kanto, which was expected to start this morning, but he has not arrived yet. Delia Ketchum flicked off the news report, before turning to her guests. Norman and Caroline Maple had called her after being ordered out of their home the previous week, and she had welcomed them staying with her. Norman was still in a degree of shock, but was recovering. It was noon in Pallet Town, and they were sat in the Ketchum kitchen, drinking tea. Silence reigned, as it had predominantly since the Maples' arrival. It wasn't that they had nothing to talk about but more that Caroline and Norman were trying to come to terms with the events that led to them being thrown out of their home. Caroline didn't blame her husband, but she was in shock that the Pokémon Master had that kind of authority that meant he could do such a thing. Norman was staring at his tea, looking like he wanted to drown himself in it. He had been totally and utterly humiliated. Not only had he lost his job, but two of his most powerful Pokémon had been taken out by a single attack. He had thought he was a strong trainer, and felt he should have been able to survive longer, even against such a deadly opponent. Now he knew how Misty felt when she was defeated. Utterly helpless against such power. Norman's attention was returned to the present by the sound of the door opening, Professor Oak stepping in. The Kanto professor had called in on the house every day, speaking to Norman about a right of appeal. Since it had been so long since a gym leader was replaced, the researcher had to go deep into league records. He had told them that he would have the results by today, and was here to discuss their options. "There is some good news for you," Professor Oak started. "Not much, but you have something to work with." If the researcher didn't have Norman's full attention before, he did now. "Go on." "There is a right of appeal, if you have been wrongly dismissed from your role by the Pokémon Master. The question is, have you? We reviewed my battling record, it was better than some of the leaders he didn't fire." "Indeed. However, being a gym leader didn't used to be just about battling. Unfortunately, when these rules were made, it was down to what gym leaders had to do at the time. These regulations were made back at the original foundation of the league. If you were a gym leader then, you actually had a quota of trainers that had to be trained each year. If you failed to maintain a school of at least the size of the quota, you were given an official warning. If you then failed again inside the next 3 years, there were grounds for your removal." "But Norman's been leader for 17 years, Caroline interjected. "And he's not been given a warning in any of them, or trained other trainers. He wasn't told he had to." "Indeed," Professor Oak said. "He wasn't told he had to, but the regulations never changed, they were simply forgotten. I had Gary dig these out, he's actually quite good at it. The fact that you didn't train any trainers in all these years implies that your removal is valid, but the fact that you were never given a warning is in your favor. You could argue that you have a year to fix it. Despite the fact that I managed to miss out on nearly 2 decades worth of teaching. Yes. I don't guarantee success, simply because you did miss out years. This is however the best I can do. I'm sorry." Norman looked unhappy, as well he might. He hadn't expected much from the research, but this was disappointing, as it meant that he would have to struggle to get his job back. Caroline, expecting something like this, was resigned to the fact that with Champion as Pokémon Master, Norman would not become the Petalburg gym leader again. Faulkner received the message in the morning. He had arrived at his gym to find it sat in his inbox. It was brief, but very clear, the way Champion liked to work. Arriving today to interview captured rockets. Champion. Faulkner had sent a message to Officer Jenny to let her know, before beginning his gym's daily routine, exercising the Pokémon and observing his trainees. He kept checking for the arrival of the Pokémon Master, as so wasn't surprised when he saw the now trademark large red dragon soaring through the air towards Violet City. Faulkner turned to his backup, instructing him to carry on with the daily routine. The flying-type gym leader then hurried to the roof, and released his Pidgeot. The trainer and bird flew together to meet the Charizard, reaching the police station at the same time as Champion did. He was greeted with a nod by the figure in black, who then strode into the station, with Faulkner hurrying behind. Officer Jenny looked up when she heard the door open. Thanks to Faulkner's warning, she knew to expect the man arriving. She hadn't met him before, so was unprepared for the aura he carried with him. Just being near him gave her a sense of his power. She stood up and came around her desk to greet her distinguished visitor. Champion. Thank you for taking your time to deal with this personally. I never expected this level of involvement. Unseen under his customary hat, Champion stared into Jenny's eyes, working out if she was being serious. He realized that she genuinely was surprised that the resurgence of a major criminal organization would attract his attention. What she didn't know was the reason Team Rocket was so important to him. Unlike virtually everybody else, Champion knew why they had vanished 4 years previously. He was responsible for it. Putting this to the back of his mind, he answered the police officer. Don't be. Team Rocket will be dealt with. Where are they? Isolated in cells. And the trainers? Being looked after by Nurse Joy. What will you need for the interrogations? An interview room and complete privacy. I will question them alone. Jenny nodded and headed deeper into the station, Champion and Faulkner following behind. As they walked, Champion spoke to Faulkner. Well done on this. You did well to bring them all in. Thank you, sir. Just doing my job. Good. I want you to make sure that the trainers remain isolated and away from any media whilst I deal with the Rockets. Looking after them shouldn't be hard. The media haven't gotten hold of this yet. There weren't many people who noticed the events inside the Sprout Tower, and I have made the need for silence clear to the elders who are usually in residence. With any luck, the press will never know. That would be ideal. Thank you, Faulkner. The gym leader knew he had been dismissed, so he departed the police station and headed across the city towards the Pokémon Center. The first Team Rocket grunt to be questioned was the one who had spoken to Faulkner the previous evening. He was led into the interview room by Officer Jenny, who left him there. As the Rocket sat down, he found himself facing Ash across a table. Refusing to be the first to say anything, he sat in silence whilst Ash studied him. After nearly a full minute, Ash started to speak. You have one chance. Tell me what I want to know truthfully. If you do, I can mitigate your sentence. If you don't, it will be very long. Now, where were you recruited? With only a small bit of hesitation, the Rocket decided that answering the questions up to a point might be a good idea. He could get his inevitable prison sentence shortened without actually giving vital information away. In Goldenrod City. Where were you trained? I don't know. Some sort of base, I don't know where. How long have you been with Team Rocket? I joined 2.5 years ago. How many operations have you been in? Like last night? That was the first. Any other kind? No. Who's your team leader? Alex. Why did you join? I got into debt. I wasn't given much choice. Over the last 2 years though, loyalty was drummed in, and as my quality of life improved, I wanted to stay. It was a better life than living on the street. Ash leaned back in his chair, observing the man in front of him. The Rocket was young, in his 20s, and scrawny. He was the kind of person that was easy to not notice. And through his mental connection with Espion, Ash could tell that he was telling the truth. Ash had released his Pokémon to pick apart the Rocket's minds when they were interviewed, taking all the information pertaining to Team Rocket. Espion could also tell if they were lying, something Ash could do himself, but with Espion inside their mind already, there was no reason not to use that ability as well. He leaned forward again before starting to talk. Very well. Your cooperation will be noted. You will be returned to your cell. Before the rocket could say anything else, the door opened behind him, and Officer Jenny led him out. As Officer Jenny went to lock his cell, she heard it lock itself. She looked quizzically at it, before hearing another lock behind her. She turned around, and saw that a different cell had unlocked, and the door opened, showing the leader of the squad of rockets. Jenny blinked in surprise, before realizing that this was probably the man that Champion next wanted to talk to, so she led him towards the interview room. No comment. Where are the Team Rocket bases in this region? No comment. Where is Giovanni? No comment. Why have you started operations again? No comment. Ash was asking every question in a perfectly level tone, whilst each was answered in the same way. A normal questioner would be getting angry after 20 minutes of this, but Ash wasn't normal. He didn't even feel bothered. The questions were only a cover whilst Espion extracted the information from Alex's mind. There had been a disappointing amount, no locations of bases, or anything else. The only useful thing that Espion had found was the location of this particular squad's hideout, which was in a forest to the north of Violet. Otherwise, Ash had gotten nothing new. He continued asking questions for a few more minutes, whilst Espion read the minds of the rest of the rockets, but there was nothing else useful there. Eventually he just sent Alex back to his cell, informing him that his lack of cooperation wouldn't do him any credit in his trial. He then went to speak to Officer Jenny. Thank you for your help. That'll be all I need. The policewoman couldn't hide her surprise. That's it? Only 2 of them for such a short length of time. They know nothing else of use. I'll be moving on. What about Team Rocket? Your main priority is to stop the news of their return leaking out. Any more activity, the old procedures still stand. However, I don't expect them to return here, it wouldn't make sense. What do we do with the rockets? They will be escorted to Indigo and tried. Thank you again. And with that, Ash turned and strode out of the police station, leaving a confused Officer Jenny in his wake. Sam Fernandez woke up with a terrible headache. He didn't know what caused it, just that it really hurt. He sat up and looked around, wondering where he was. The last thing he remembered was being in the Sprout Tower with Melanie, heading up to the top, hearing her scream. As that burst into his head he rolled off the bed, but before he could take a step he promptly collapsed. On hearing the noise, Nurse Joy hurried in, and helped the youngster back onto his bed where he had spent such a long time knocked out. As she settled him, he realized that Melanie was in the bed across the room. Noting him looking at her, Nurse Joy smiled. She'll recover soon, Sam. Huh? Where are we? Violet City Pokémon Center. You've been out for a while. Faulkner was in here not so long ago, but you were all still knocked out. All of us. He brought in 6 of you last night. I never expected that when I sent him out to look for you. I didn't even realize that many people went to the Sprout Tower at night. Sam lay back down, his head throbbing once again. He looked outside, realizing that it was at least late afternoon, the sun was quite low in the sky. Was it only one day? Sam asked. What, that you were out? Yes, I asked Faulkner to look for you after you hadn't come back. He stumbled onto quite an operation up there. Thank you. We owe you. Don't mention it. Your Pokémon are also fully recovered. They've been impatient to see you, but I suggest we let Melanie wake up first. Thank you, Nurse Joy. As the nurse left, Sam slowly stood up, leaning against the bed whilst he endured the wave of pain that came with the motion. As it ebbed back down again, Sam took quick steps towards the bed across the room, reaching it, before collapsing against it as his headache returned with a vengeance once again. Once he had recovered, he sat down next to his childhood friend and waited for her to wake up. 30 minutes later Melanie groaned. Sam, who had begun to doze, was snapped back to consciousness, and turned towards his friend. Her eyes began to flutter open before she focused on Sam. "Where are we?" she asked. "Violet City Pokémon Center. Faulkner brought us in." "Faulkner brought, what?" "Nurse Joy was worried about us, so asked him to have a look. He found us with some others and brought us all here." "What happened to us?" "We haven't been told. All I know is that some people tried to steal our Pokémon, but I wasn't told who." "Our Pokémon? Where are they?" "Relax, Melanie," Sam said. "They are here. We can go and visit them when you're ready." "I'm ready," the girl said, then stood up. Before promptly collapsing, just like Sam had. Resisting the temptation to make a comment, he reached down and hauled Melanie up. She smiled a thank you at him before heading for the door, albeit somewhat slower this time. It was another hour before Ash strode into the Pokémon Center. He had flown out to the forest and located the hideout, something made far easier by Espion using the rocket's memories. He had found very little of use there, and for now knew that the trail was cold. Without any other leads there was little he could do, and Ash reluctantly conceded that Team Rocket had gotten away from him. All he had found was information for the operation Faulkner had interrupted. All Ash had to do now was to tie up a few loose ends, which was why he was at the Pokémon Center. As he came through the door, he saw Nurse Joy sat at her front desk. She looked up and spotted him, recognizing him instantly. "Champion, what an honor. Are you here to talk to the captured trainers?" "I am." "How are they?" "Recovering. I can't believe the quantity of drags that Team Rocket put into them. It was enough to put them out for nearly a day. The man who gave the order in the squad will be punished." "Where are the trainers?" "Recovering in the private rooms at the back. I can show you if you wish. I can find the way." Ash strode down the corridor next to the desk, before going through the double doors at the end, and walking the length of another corridor. He then turned right, and reached a door which required a code to enter. He put his hand over it, and the door opened, allowing him in. There was a medium-sized room with sofas and a TV in it. The room had 6 trainers inside. Ash recognized 2 of them, Sam Fernandez and Melanie Rigger. He smiled to himself, he knew that he saw something in those 2. They just had to avoid Team Rocket. As he walked in, all attention switched to him, particularly when he walked to the TV and turned it off before standing in front of it. "I believe you know who I am. I hope you are recovering well from the events of last night. The men responsible have been captured and are awaiting trial. You will not be required to give evidence, the trials will be very secret affairs. This is because I am establishing a blackout about this. I will let you know because you are very closely linked to it, but what I tell you here is not for the public to know." Ash paused whilst he let his words sink in. Each trainer nodded slowly as he said that they couldn't talk about it at all. By letting his aura out, he could sense the agreement in each of them. "The people who captured you are called Team Rocket. They are a criminal group that you may have heard of. For years ago they dropped off the map, they are apparently making a return. I am moving to stop them as quickly as possible, but until I do I cannot allow the news of their resurgence to become public. As a result, I must ask all of you not to speak about this to anybody. We have kept it quiet from the media, so they should not trouble you. Any questions?" Most of the listening trainers were awestruck from merely meeting the Pokémon Master, let alone being ready to actually ask him any questions, but 2 of them weren't cowed by the man in front of them. Sam put up his hand, and Ash turned to him. "Sir, why were we targeted?" "You specifically weren't. Team Rocket aimed to steal Pokémon, you were just in their sights last night." "Anybody else?" When there was no response, Ash thanked them for their time and turned to leave. He left the Pokémon Center, released Charizard once again, and headed towards Indigo Plateau. Brock was driving towards Pallet Town. He wanted to see Norman and Caroline, to make sure that they were okay. As he drove he reflected that if Ash was still here, he would have probably been there first. It was the only thing that ever distracted him from his training, problems with his friends. The more Brock thought about his friend, the more he missed him. They had been closer than brothers, which was impressive given all the siblings that Brock had. And yet, Ash had vanished. After Sinnoh he had gone to the very place Brock was heading to now, and then after a mere few days, he had vanished. Brock wondered what had happened to him. Had he died? Brock remembered when Pikachu came back to Pallet. The poor Pokémon had looked exhausted, and had clearly traveled for some time without a trainer. He looked wild, but had recognized Delia, who had called Professor Oak. Pikachu was taken to a hospital, but refused treatment, until in desperation Gary called Brock. Brock managed to get through to the mouse, and started to help him recover, before persuading Pikachu to allow the doctors to help him. Some time on, when Jesse, James and Meowth quit Team Rocket, Brock had asked Meowth to ask Pikachu what had happened to Ash. Ash's first Pokémon had told Brock that Ash was dead. Brock hadn't really known what to make of it, and at first had refused to believe it. However, 7 years on, without hearing anything from his old friend, he started to think that perhaps Pikachu was right. Brock couldn't believe that he wouldn't have come back once in all that time. But if he hadn't, what would he be like? Every time Brock thought about his old friend it went like this, but he knew that there was a simple piece of logic that made it very hard to believe his friend was still around. Pikachu would never leave Ash if he was alive. As Brock pulled up in front of the Ketchum residence, his thoughts had made him somewhat melancholy. However, as he stepped inside, being greeted by Delia, and his thoughts started to slip away. Sitting down, he greeted Norman Maple, who was looking thoroughly irritated. After exchanging pleasantries for a few minutes, Norman started explaining an idea of his. "Brock, you've always been one of the more sensible of the group," the ex-gym leader started. "And yet you're young enough to have the same belief as our kids that things can work out right. So I want your honest opinion on this. If, somehow, somebody managed to replace the Pokémon Master, do you think it would be possible for those who had lost their gyms to get them back? Not just me, but all the other leaders across the regions, including the Pewter Gym if it doesn't make the cut." Brock was shocked. The suggestion had come straight out of the blue. He turned to Professor Oak who was sat across the room. "Do you know about this?" Brock demanded. "Norman did suggest it to me," the researcher conceded. "I confess, I feel for Professor Elm, it is hard being thrown out like that. But to replace him, somebody has to beat him. And what makes you think that anybody that strong would be willing to listen to you? Hell, I doubt they exist." "But if they did," pressed Norman. "Do you think it is a viable strategy?" Brock took a deep breath. He knew Norman was reacting to the loss of his gym and was desperate to try to recover it, but this idea smacked of desperation. It wasn't just that he was trying to replace the most powerful trainer in the world with an even stronger trainer, it was that this new trainer would for some reason undo everything that Champion had done. It didn't help that Brock actually agreed with some of what had been done. The idea of teaching young trainers being spread down to the gym leader level was a good one. He thought the implementation was a bit ruthless, but the principle was good. He had been trying to persuade Forrest to do it at the Pewter Gym for a long while, and the gym had slowly started to accept recruits. Brock had tried to increase the drive over the last few weeks, using his name as a doctor and breeder to ensure that trainers would want to come. Brock was hopeful that his family's gym would stand up to the inevitable inspection. Turning back to the waiting Norman, Brock decided to make his position very clear. "Norman, I have a lot of respect for you as a gym leader. But I'm guessing that you are only doing this because the legal options are limited and unlikely to work." The grimace from Norman answered that one for Brock. "Thought so. I don't believe that this is a viable option. To find a trainer who could defeat Champion would be virtually impossible. I can't think of anybody who could even come close. Cynthia had her entire team wiped out by his Charizard. Misty's team was steamrolled by a Sharpedo that can run on land. He would have 4 more Pokémon with hidden abilities and the same strength of the ones we have seen. Do you honestly believe anybody can defeat him? And even if they did, why would their first be to undo all the work he did? You may not like it, but the idea of the reorganization is popular. People think it's a good idea to have gym leaders available as teachers to trainers. It will improve the overall standard of trainers, which is a good thing. So, in my opinion, it's not workable. I came here to ensure that there is nothing you needed. As I can see that you are perfectly fine, I'm going home. I'm still working to make sure that Forrest can stay as the Pewter City gym leader. Good night. Brock stood up and strode to the door, got in his car and drove into the night. Professor Oak stood in the window watching him turn the corner and leave Pallet Town, before facing Norman once more. So I think he disagrees. Ash strode into his office at Indigo, before sending summons for Cynthia. She appeared at his door, and took the offered chair. Before he even opened his mouth, she could see that there was something different. He hadn't looked like this before. I've just got in from Violet City. Faulkner found a cadre of Team Rocket grunts stealing Pokémon. I questioned them, and found the cadre's hideout in a nearby forest. It had nothing about the potential whereabouts of any other part of Team Rocket. Their orders were delivered by flying Pokémon. The final message was one telling them that their cover was blown, so they were abandoned by Team Rocket. I don't know how Team Rocket knew, but they did. Cynthia's brain was only just beginning to catch up. She had been in intense training for her challenge to the World League when Team Rocket vanished. When her challenge had culminated in her becoming Pokémon Master, she had started to consolidate, implementing her own policies. She had never bothered to try and track down any evidence, assuming that they wouldn't ever return. It seemed she had been wrong about that. She turned her attention back to Champion as he continued. If you know anything about them, I would be grateful. Trying to track them down again will be hard. If I can get into one of their major bases, I can crack the network, but I have to find them. Furthermore, I want to try to keep this quiet. Faulkner did a good job preventing the media from finding out about this attack, but if they start more, it will be hard to keep it quiet forever. Therefore, this has to be our top priority, protecting the public from the news. Thoughts? Well. Cynthia stuttered, trying to keep up. I don't know where they might be, but I agree, keep it quiet from the press. Good. I need you to go to Violet City and collect the rockets in prison there. Bring them here. I presume overnight? Yes. Whilst I do the review of Kanto, I'll watch for them. I'll also inform the gym leaders outside Kanto before I go. Champion stood up, but Cynthia remained seated, still in shock. As he reached the door, he turned back to his frozen subordinate. Problem? Sorry, but I'm trying to keep up. You're moving too fast for me. I've only just found out about this, and you're rushing through plans. I've had the journey from Violet to think about this. If you think that you've got a better plan, please say. Cynthia thought, but couldn't think quickly. After half a minute, she shook her head, and Champion left the office, leaving her to follow him, which she quickly did. She returned to her office, before quickly organizing a transport helicopter for herself to bring them back. Her Pokémon would struggle to make the journey without a break, and they wouldn't be able to bring back the rockets. As she stepped out of the building towards the hangar, she realized that the timing was perfect. She would arrive in the early hours of the morning, and be at Indigo before anybody was able to notice her missing. It just meant she was going to have a very long night. As she reached the hangar, she climbed into a helicopter, nodding to the pilot and settling herself down to sleep. The pilot shook her awake some time later. Ma'am, we have landed at the Violet City Police Station. Officer Jenny is here. Cynthia rubbed her eyes and then left the helicopter to greet the law enforcement officer. Officer. My congratulations to you and Faulkner for a job well done. Thank you. You're taking them? Yes. I'll take them back to Indigo where we can watch them. The two women started to head into the station, but as they entered the door, Jenny turned back to Cynthia, who realizing that something was wrong, gestured to Jenny's office. "What's wrong?" "It's when the Pokémon Master was here. Things seemed slightly off." "In what way?" "His interviews. He interviewed 2 of the rockets, that's it. Furthermore, between the interviews, when I was taking one of them back to his cell, the cell door opened by itself, as did the door of the cell of the next one he wanted. The one who just happened to be the leader of the group. The door thing I'm getting used to, and his choice implies he's good at getting information. But it's weird, I obviously questioned them myself, and they refused to give me anything. He was here for a grand total of 30 minutes, and he seemed to have everything he needed. That's impossible. I appreciate you coming to me with this, but you have to understand that I can't do anything about it. I accept that it's confusing, but trust me, he is good at his job. Just accept that, and keep doing the wonderful job you're doing. Okay. And I have to keep this quiet? I'm afraid so. One day I will find out why he can do what he does, but till then, I'm just going to do my job. Thanks. So, rockets this way. Jenny, feeling somewhat happier, led Cynthia towards the cells at the back of the police station. As they got there, she unlocked the first cell, expecting to have to wake the rocket up. He was awake, and held his arms out to be cuffed. Somewhat bemused, Officer Jenny did so, and then opened the next cell, to be given the same treatment. After all 9 of the rockets had been cuffed, they meekly followed Cynthia back to the helicopter where they were restrained to the inside. The pilot took off, and she was headed back for Indigo, still mulling over why the rockets who had reportedly been aggressive towards Officer Jenny were suddenly so meek. Ash stepped out into the garden behind his house. His Pokémon all trained by themselves when he was out busy, but when he was home, he always insisted on a tougher regime. They fell in around him as he started his run, keeping pace through the distance. As he approached the 30-mile mark, they started to look at each other, and by the time he had run for 35 miles, increasing the pace all the way, they were getting alarmed. All of his Pokémon as physically fit as it was possible to be, but with Ash enhancing his body with aura, it was possible that they might not be able to keep up forever. Eventually he started to arc back towards his home, where he started to meditate, leaving the Pokémon to train together. There were mutters among them, they hadn't been pushed this hard for a long time. The last time that their training had been so intense was when Ash had last had a serious problem to mull over. It had been over 4 years ago, just before they began to track down Team Rocket. That had been one of the hardest times in their journey, as although they were all powerful, Team Rocket was a huge organization. Only one Pokémon had stuck with Ash as he fought his way into the heart of the base hidden deep in the mountains, the rest had been fighting off rocket grunts. Espeon had been his last Pokémon, and neither had spoken of what had happened inside. All the other Pokémon knew was that Team Rocket had been removed. After only half an hour, Ash stood up once again. The Pokémon stopped training, and assembled in front of him, expecting the reason for his unease to be given. Espeon patted her way to his feet, already knowing what he was about to say. Team Rocket have resurfaced. Some of their operatives were discovered in Johto yesterday, but had no idea where any major installation is. Apparently we aren't going to be able to work our way in the same way as last time. However, that doesn't mean that we aren't going to be able to take them down. I need the scout team to head out once again. Check remote areas, search for anything that looks off. If you can find something, come back here and let me know. We will take Team Rocket down once again. And this time, we will get Giovanni. He will not escape me twice. His Pokémon nodded, and the group that belonged to the scout team stood in front of him. He knelt in front of them. It was a group of 3 Pokémon, none from his main lineup, and none of his originals. They would be able to cover Kanto inside a week, but would return after that, because they would need rest if they covered that kind of distance. Ash turned to the leader of the group. Alakazam, I know this will be exhausting. You will be able to rest when it's done. If you need backup, call for it. The Psy Pokémon nodded, and then crossed his spoons, causing the group to teleport out. Ash then turned back to the rest of the team. When we find Team Rocket, we will be facing them again. However, there will be a difference. Last time we were being cautious when we headed in. We have all become far more stronger, and so will move far quicker. We must not let Giovanni escape again. I will be continuing to travel around the regions, but you must train to be ready. Nothing can stand against you. I will return in a week. Charizard, let's go. Leaving his Pokémon behind once again, Ash leaped high into the air, leaving a comfortable 40 yards beneath him. Charizard accelerated forwards, and Ash landed neatly on the dragon's back as they headed out towards Pewter City. Back on the ground, the Pokémon were about to return to their training when they noticed food bowls floating through the air to them. Each one had more food than usual, the message being clear. Train hard, and be ready. Espeon looked into the sky, where Charizard had vanished, praying that her master would be careful. He would surely be a target for Team Rocket if they aim for the Pokémon League. When Brock reached Pewter City, he called the Cerulean gym. Misty picked up, looking exhausted. Hi Brock, what can I do for you? Just making sure that you're alright for the inspection. We've been working harder than ever for this. My sisters have actually shown that they have actually become pretty good gym leaders, so all we needed was trainees. My name helped bring some in, and the rest just wanted to be close to the old, sensational sisters that and Gary's been a huge help. What about you? I think we're ready. Forrest has worked hard, as has the rest of the family. We should be alright. Good. Misty noticed that there was something else off about her friend. Brock, are you alright? What? Yeah, I'm fine. Misty didn't even bother to talk, merely raising an eyebrow at the breeder. Okay. I've just got back from Pallet. How are Norman and Caroline? I didn't see Caroline. Norman however had a scary idea. He thinks he can get his gym back if he orchestrates the fall of the current Pokémon Master, and has a new one in place. Misty stared at him, causing Brock to chuckle. My thoughts are apparently mirrored, Brock said. I told him that I wasn't interested, but I'm worried Misty. I think Norman might go for it, and there are at least 10 unhappy people with authority out there, all the people he's replaced so far. We don't need this instability. No we don't. But Brock, what can we do? We're both up to our necks trying to have our families hold on to their gyms, we don't have time for this. No, I just wanted to give you some warning, in case he goes for you as well. I can vouch for the fact that it's not fun to have that sprung onto you. Misty smiled wearily at him. Thanks Brock. Good luck when he arrives. And to you Misty. Good night. Brock ended the call, then went to find Forrest. They toured the gym together making sure that everything was as good as it could be. The trainees that they had managed to pull in were sleeping. Brock was impressed at the numbers they had managed to pull in so quickly. It was this more than anything that made Brock think that the Pokémon Master might be onto something. There clearly were people who wanted to be taught, just there hadn't really been a system in place to teach them. Now there was, and people were already using it. Brock had been in contact with the majority of Kanto leaders, and was confident that there shouldn't be any more leaders being replaced. They had all managed to use the few extra weeks that they had to get in trainees. Perhaps Kanto would be fine. After one last look around the gym, Brock headed for bed. There was nothing else that could be done, it was down to the champion, as to whether they had done enough. The Pewter City gym door swung open with a rumble. Pokémon Master, Ash Ketchum stepped through and looked around. The gym's battlefield was a standard rock field which he remembered from when he was last there. He looked up to the ceiling to note that the sprinklers were no longer there, smiling to himself with respect to the first gym battle he had ever fought. He stepped further into the gym, to see the gym leader stand up from where he had been sitting at the far end of the field. Forrest stepped forward and started to speak. I would normally start this with a challenge, but here I don't think that is wise. Welcome to my gym, Champion. Ash looked at the leader and nodded, striding to the center of the field. He stood, did a full turn looking around the field, and then looked back at Forest. I will let you know when I'm finished. Ash then turned and strode through a door at the side of the arena, to look around the gym more, leaving Forest to sit back down and get his breathing back under control. Ash stepped into a room which was an exercise room. It was in use by two men, who looked up at Ash and were about to get up before he gestured for them to carry on with what they were doing. He proceeded through the rest of the gym before returning to the main arena. In there he found Forest battling, and Brock refereeing. He stood and watched Forest's Onyx be defeated by his opponent's Wartortle, stepping forward after the challenger had left the gym. Forest, your gym passes. The attached breeder center is impressive credit for I believe must go to you Brock Slate. Keep up the good work here, and you'll not hear from me very often. Questions? You know about me? Brock asked. You were interviewed by me 2 months ago for the review of the license of Misty Waterflower. Brock blinked. He hadn't realized that he would be remembered so clearly by the Pokémon Master. Do I need to improve on anything? Forest inquired. Nothing yet. Once the review is complete, I will send out further instructions. Nothing else. Thank you, Champion. Ash nodded and strode out of the gym, released Charizard and flew into the sky, heading straight for Cerulean City. Hey! Hey you! I challenge you to a Pokémon battle. James opened his eyes, to see a man stood in front of him. The man was wearing flamboyant clothes, a bright yellow shirt with an orange pattern, and electric blue trousers. He had a Pokeball in his hand, and was glaring at James. James looked to his side and saw Meowth lying there, asleep. Oi! Are you gonna battle or not? James turned back to the man in front of him, before smoothly standing up. Where I come from, I usually introduce myself before I fight somebody. James said, whilst smiling civilly at the man in front of him who was now fuming. So, shall we try this again? Hello, I'm James Kojiro, may I inquire as to your name? The purple-haired trainer said, whilst extending his hand. I don't care who you are, battle me, screamed the furious man. Very well. Shall we go for a 2-on-2? Make it a double battle kid, I don't have time for long fights. Well you did challenge me. I accept. A double battle it is. James reached down and expanded a pair of Pokeballs. Growlithe, Piku, it's battle time. James' childhood Growlithe appeared in front of him, before turning to lick his face, whilst Piku hid behind his trainer's leg. James smiled down at the small electric type. It had been nearly 5 years since Piku had agreed to come with him. James had spent months searching for one, as he wanted to keep one as a mark of respect to the Pokémon that turned him into a trainer. Piku had trained with Pikachu and had become far stronger. The two insisted on a spar every time they met. However, despite all this time, Piku still loved to play games. Pretending to be timid was his favorite. If he was in a battle he would invariably hide behind James' leg to lure his opponent into making a mistake. James knew this, and despite trying to change his Pokémon, Piku carried on. Turning his attention back to his opponent, James raised an eyebrow. Going to call out your Pokémon? I thought you were in a hurry. Gour, Dugtrio, Marowak fight. The two Pokémon appeared, and looked menacingly at James' team who were still attached to their trainer. Behind him, James heard Meowth mutter in his sleep, and grinned. He could tell by looking at them that his opponent's Pokémon weren't particularly strong, and he wanted to wake Meowth up in the battle. The difference in Pokémon strength gave him some leeway in how he fought, so he turned back to his Pokémon. Come on guys, what do you say we wake Meowth up? Growlithe barked and jumped down to in front of his trainer, whilst Piku smiled up at James before taking his place. Dugtrio, Marowak, combine earthquakes. The two ground types started to make the ground shake. James merely smiled calmly before retaliating. Piku, thunder. Growlithe, when you're ready, dig. Piku fired a huge bolt of electricity into the ground between the two pairs of Pokémon, causing a crack in the ground that absorbed all the power from the dual earthquake. As soon as their side of the field stopped shaking, Growlithe dug underground. Dug Trio, follow that mutt, Marowak, Bone Club the rat. The three heads of Dug Trio vanished into the ground, and Marowak started charging at Piku. As he got closer, the small electric type simply ducked under the club before scampering away to where Meowth sat. Marowak was swinging his club again and again, missing each time. Eventually, Piku stood right next to Meowth, and Marowak slammed his club down. Piku just rolled backwards out of the way, and Marowak hit the ground right next to where Meowth stood. There was a crack, and the ground suddenly fell away, with the Bone Keeper Pokémon falling into a hole that had suddenly appeared. As he fell, Dug Trio chasing Growlithe raced into the hole, causing the two Pokémon to collide. Meowth had woken up and instinctively grabbed at the side of the hole. Looking up, he saw Growlithe and Piku stood over the hole, grinning with the two Pokémon inside. James, the smirk on his face now very pronounced, gave his final order. Thunder and overheat. As the two Pokémon fired their attacks, there was plume of fire which sparkled with electricity. Piku and Growlithe stepped away as the two Pokémon inside the hole were comprehensively beaten. Meowth, having only just got out of the way, scowled at James. "What was that for?" "I was just having a snooze," the Scratch Cat Pokémon asked. "Sorry Meowth, I couldn't resist," James said whilst grinning. He turned back to his opponent. "I think that wraps this up. Good battle." The man just glared at him as he recalled his Pokémon, growling "PSS off" at James as he stomped away. Watching him leave, James just raised an eyebrow, with Meowth grinning. Turning back to his Pokémon, James recalled Growlithe and Piku before gesturing to Meowth that they should go. James was traveling again, just without Jessie for once. She had gone to Goldenrod City to a store that she was in the process of opening to sell the clothes that she was designing. In the 7 years that she had been doing it, she had opened a few shops, but this was going to be by far the biggest, and it was taking up all her time. James had taken the opportunity to wander around Kanto and train his Pokémon a bit more. He had considered challenging the gyms, but hadn't gotten around to it just yet. As they walked, he turned back to Meowth. "Do you reckon that they'll pass the inspection?" Meowth thought for a moment, and then answered. "They should do. Them twerps had long enough to do what theys needed to." The cat thought for a moment. "Norman went though, dot. Yeah, but he's hardly the brightest spark, is he? He wouldn't have worked like Brock and Misty to protect their gyms." Meowth chuckled. "True." The two continued to chat as they made their way past Mount Moon. Suddenly James' head snapped up, seeing something in the distance. He pointed it out to Meowth, who stared for a moment then grimaced. The Charizard that both had seen was heading towards Cerulean, but it was something that they both recognized. It was Champion's Charizard, which meant that the Cerulean Gym review was about to begin. The two friends looked at each other before heading towards the city. They owed it to their friend to find out what happens. Pikachu was bored. Usually he enjoyed staying with Misty when he wasn't in Pallet Town, but she had been so busy recently that he had been forced to entertain himself for long periods of time. He was a powerful Pokémon, and Misty had told him he could go anywhere, so he didn't feel guilty wandering around Cerulean City all day. However, at the moment he was resting on the top of a tall building, having climbed up earlier. His thoughts started to drift, as they always did when he was bored, back to his first trainer, his best friend, Ash Ketchum. Pikachu still felt the guilt of leaving. 7 years on, and it still hadn't faded. He thought at the time he was doing the right thing. Ash had pushed his Pokémon harder than ever before, and Pikachu felt that Ash had stopped caring about them. He saw them only as the means to achieve his aims. Over the years Pikachu had started to question that view. When he thought back, Ash had never actually shown any cruelty to his Pokémon. Pikachu knew that Ash had become more distant, but the intense training hadn't exactly been good towards time to sit down and relax together. Coupled with the other Pokémon leaving, those that couldn't endure the training and Ash would have been under huge strain. It was the time that Pikachu should have stood by him, but Pikachu had left. At the time it felt like his friend was becoming somebody colder, somebody Pikachu didn't feel was the same. The Ash Ketchum he had once loved was disappearing, which is why he told Meowth that Ash was dead. Pikachu wondered what had happened to Ash. After all the years he could have been anybody. He remembered the day he left with the rest of the Pokémon. He wanted to return to Pallet, knowing that if Ash ever came home, it would be the Ash he wanted. None of the others wanted to. They were angry that Pikachu had forced Ash's hand, and made them make the decision. They had all headed off into the wild, leaving Pikachu to do the journey alone. As the memories flowed, tears fell down Pikachu's cheeks. He wanted to be able to go back to how it had been, but couldn't. To distract himself, Pikachu looked out over the city. In the distance he saw a Charizard winging its way across the city. Watching it fly, Pikachu felt that he knew it from somewhere, but he couldn't place it. As he watched, the dragon started to descend, with a particular building looking like its destination. The Cerulean Gym. Deciding to head back towards the gym to try to get another look at the Pokémon, Pikachu headed down from his building, before starting to run towards the Cerulean Gym. As he ran he thought about his fitness. Since he came back, he had continued with the planned endurance training. He was still as physically fit as he could be, and quicker than a little Pikachu had any right to be. Thinking about the Charizard, Pikachu gritted his teeth with determination and accelerated, whilst still dodging pedestrians as much as possible. Cynthia was sat in her office once again. She had spent nearly 2 months working without actually managing to complete her primary role. She had intended to spend only a few weeks putting together the group of trainers who would be taught under her, but 2 months on, she was now struggling to find time. Each of the gyms across the 4 regions had started to send her names to observe, and she was becoming more and more burdened with the work. The fact that she wasn't able to leave Indigo for long further restricted her. However, she had finally found the alternative, and was in the process of organizing the first of a series of training camps. They would last for a week, and trainers from a particular region would be invited. She had decided that the first region would be Johto, and so had already contacted Professor Rose to get a list of top trainers. In addition she had consulted the Pokémon League's computer, and found some more trainers who she could use. As she worked, she began to think about what she thought of the Pokémon Master. Champion was an intriguing man she felt, but there was something off about him she felt. The way that his office doors opened and shut by themselves was the most obvious thing, but there was more. There just seemed to be too many things about him that were kept secret, things that he had buried and she couldn't reach. Cynthia had prided herself on her research before she became Pokémon Master herself, and she wanted to try to work out some of the mysteries around her boss. She also decided to keep it quiet, because she suspected he would not want her digging around in his mysteries. She had made a list of all the things that she had either seen him do or heard of him doing that didn't make sense, such as the way doors seemed to always open themselves around him, and the way that he healed Golduck. She thought to the meeting when he had offered her a job, and she thought of something else. His eyes had been very strange then, one glowing electric blue, the other dark and lifeless. In all her years of research she had never heard of anything like that. Cynthia sighed. This was the real reason she hadn't made as much progress on the teaching front as she liked. She was distracted trying to work out mysteries. The eyes, though, was something she could investigate. It was clear that Champion had spent time away from civilization, for him to become so powerful without anybody knowing. As a result, it was very possible that he had found something that caused it. If so, it would be potentially possible to find a point in history where something similar had happened, and use it to suggest what had happened to Champion. But even then it would be useful to have a place to start. She tried to think back to her research, some of it having been ignored for a while, before she realized that she hadn't actually touched her keyboard for nearly 5 minutes. Cynthia groaned and forced herself to focus on her work once again, highlighting trainers that she could invite. She wanted 30 of the best for the first week, and had chosen all but 2. The last few were proving problematic, but she had ideas. Sighing once again, she went back to her lists, to track down the last 2 trainers she wanted. Misty was wandering through Cerulean City with May. Since Norman had been removed from his gym, May and Drew had decided to make their way through Kanto once again, not competing in contests, just enjoying themselves. As they had passed Cerulean City, May had dropped in on Misty, and seeing the state of her friend, had insisted on a day out. They weren't doing anything in particular, just making sure that Misty had a break from the gym. Sitting on a bench in a park a few minutes' walk away, Misty leaned back whilst May just sat watching. After a few minutes, May decided to strike up a conversation. "So will the gym pass?" Misty looked across, warily. "I thought this was to make me take a break," the redhead asked. "It is, but you're clearly still thinking about it," May countered. "We should. I dunno what the Pokémon Master will do, but there is little reason for us not to. We have a good record, and the expansion implies dedication to the training, coupled with the fact that my sisters have actually gotten rather good." "Yeah, what happened there?" May asked. "I thought that they weren't any good at anything, and then a year ago you were willing to leave the gym to them. Seems a bit odd." Misty smiled. "It's a long story. We're not going anywhere." "Alright then. It was nearly 4 years ago." Misty had been cleaning up the gym at the end of a hard day when she heard a knock on the door. Surprised at the prospect of a late visitor, Misty headed to the door, only to see her 3 sisters there. Unlocking it, and letting them in, she saw that they all looked upset. Misty made them all cups of tea and waited for the story to pour out. Daisy was the one to eventually tell it. They had been released by their tour company, as after 7 years their popularity was in decline. It was impressive that they had lasted as long as they did, the majority of stars only lasted a few years. However, they had been told politely but firmly that their careers couldn't go any further. As Daisy finished explaining, Misty sighed. Her sisters were once again relying on her to do everything for them whilst they loafed around at home. However, Lily proved her wrong. "So we were thinking, we could become proper gym leaders. Where we actually win battles instead of being crap." The middle of the 3 sisters suggested. Misty hadn't imagined this, and could only stammer agreement. And over the course of the next few years that is what they did. They trained with Misty, they took her advice in battling, and they didn't spend days messing around where they did nothing. Eventually Misty was willing to let them battle in gym matches, and they managed to maintain quite a high win rate. When she asked them why they had become so focused, they told her that it was because they needed a career and being gym leaders was something that they wanted to do, and could do. Since they could no longer be the sensational sisters in the beauty sense, they could be the sensational sisters as gym leaders. It enabled Misty to focus more on her own training, allowing her to become the trainer that she was. After Misty finished telling May about her sisters, May was impressed. It seemed that the sisters who had been absolutely useless had finally made something of themselves. It had made Cerulean into one of the hardest gyms to tackle in Kanto, although it had been weakened when Misty finally gave it up to her sisters so she could go on a journey to train even more. The 2 friends continued chatting until Misty suddenly spotted something. A Charizard was flying across the city, before descending to land just outside of the Cerulean gym. Pointed it out to May before standing up and heading for the gym herself. Ash recalled his Charizard and stepped inside the Cerulean gym. It had barely changed since his first visit, except for the construction area at the back. As he walked through he was greeted by a receptionist, who told him that the Waterflower sisters were currently battling, but he was welcome to have a look around. Ash nodded to her, and walked through, noticing the area set aside for training, and the battlefield. He watched the battle going on, where Daisy thrashed the challenger, and nodded to himself. Returning to the front desk, he handed the receptionist a piece of paper confirming that the Cerulean gym had passed and stepped back outside. As he reached to release Charizard once again, he saw a red-headed woman moving towards him. Misty. Behind her he noticed another person that he recognized. May Maple, another of his traveling companions. Releasing Charizard, he climbed onto the dragon's back as Misty arrived. Champion, did you make your decision? I did. Your sisters still have a gym, Miss Waterflower. So we passed. You sound surprised. I didn't think you would be so kind to us. May had caught up by this time and was stood behind Misty somewhat nervously, whilst looking somewhat angrily at Ash. Misty felt the hostility behind her, as May glared at the man who had taken her father's gym away from him. Looking down at her from his position on Charizard's back, Ash also noticed her fury, but chose not to comment. He was about to fly off when Misty spoke again. Why are you doing this? Reviewing all the gyms, what incentive do you have? It's my job. No, you chose to make it your job. The league worked fine before you started interfering. And yet my changes are popular. Miss Waterflower, be careful with your words. May chose this moment to join the conversation. Not everybody approves of your changes. My father doesn't. Miss Maple, your father would never approve simply because I replaced him. If I had not, he might have been far happier. Ask your friend's sisters what they think. Why did you replace him though? He was one of Hoenn's best leaders. May queried. Because he wasn't doing what he was meant to. If he is failing at his job, he cannot continue. I have no sympathy for him. Why are you so heartless? Ash's head snapped around. That is an opinion, Miss Maple. Usually I wouldn't bother, but I'll make an exception. I simply do not permit emotions to affect my judgment. The removal of your father was not a grudge, or any kind of emotion. I merely found him lacking, and so replaced him. Before either women could respond, there was a flash of yellow as Pikachu arrived at speed. He jumped up onto Misty's shoulder, and looked at the Charizard. Ash, having already seen the little Pokémon at Misty's interview, took it in his stride. Charizard, however, wasn't as restrained. He glared at Pikachu with a look of fury in his eye. He, along with the other Pokémon that had stayed, blamed Pikachu for the changes in Ash. They believed that had Pikachu not left, Ash would never have become as cold as he did. They still loved their trainer, and he loved them, but he wasn't the same. Pikachu was trying to work out what was so familiar about the Charizard in front of him, but was taken aback at the anger he felt coming from the Pokémon. Jumping down from Misty's shoulder, he approached the dragon. Pikachu, is there a problem? Even in his anger, Charizard felt a stab of surprise. Pikachu didn't recognize him or Ash. That more than anything was enough to anger him further. The Pokémon that broke his master's heart didn't even recognize him. Staring at the rodent, Charizard merely growled, not deigning to reply with words. Pikachu, why are you so angry? You look familiar, do I know you from somewhere? Charizard didn't bother to respond, but merely spread his wings for flight. Ash, who had watched the entire exchange, patted his Pokémon's neck, causing it to take off in a rush, the wind causing Misty and May to stagger whilst Pikachu was knocked back. The door to the gym opened behind them, causing all three to turn around. Gary Oak was stood there scratching his head. Blastoise recognized that Charizard. He seemed tense. He is usually only like that with Pokémon that have beaten him when he thought they shouldn't. I wonder why. Pikachu looked back into the sky after the dragon. He wondered why both he and Blastoise could recognize the Pokémon, and why it hated him. There was something about the trainer as well. The little electric type slunk back into the gym, already mulling over any possibilities. Charizard weren't exactly the most common Pokémon around, so it shouldn't be hard to work out which of the few that he could know of were the Pokémon of the Pokémon Master. Alakazam teleported once again. Appearing alongside him was Ninetales and Beautifly, the scouts of Ash's team. They had teleported deep into Viridian Forest, where few trainers ever went, simply because the Pokémon there were far more powerful than elsewhere. The three Pokémon recognized the area, simply because they had trained there with Ash. The stronger Pokémon were a challenge to him, a challenge that he and his team had relished. This time however, they weren't looking for a fight. Alakazam adopted a meditation position, letting his mind wander out to try and detect any disturbances among the local Pokémon. Ninetales darted out, her speed enabling her to cover a large distance inside the forest. Every few hundred meters she would stop and sniff, trying to detect any human scents. Her strong sense of smell meant that if humans had passed inside the last few days, she should be able to find them. Beautifly flew up, and started to flutter to various trees as if she was looking for something. Eventually she settled down in a nook of a tree, near to the Pidgeot that was there, and started to ask if the bird's flock had seen anything. Anybody watching would have been stunned at the little butterfly's bravery, but Beautifly knew this particular Pidgeot. It was an old friend of Ash's, having been the second Pokémon he ever caught. When he was training he had returned to the forest to see his old friend. Pidgeot had chosen not to come and rejoin Ash, but remained as the guardian of Viridian Forest. Beautifly knew this, and chose to make the most of the connection. If there was a Team Rocket base nearby, Pidgeot would know. In fact, after 7 years of training and traveling, they had these connections with Pokémon in almost every area around the world. It made searching for something far easier for Ash's Pokémon. Pidgeot turned, and greeted Beautifly. After a quick discussion, Beautifly floated back down to Alakazam. Ninetales darted back in, and the three Pokémon had a quick conference. Deciding that there was nothing here, Alakazam crossed his spoons once again, and they teleported out. Total elapsed time, 7 minutes since arriving. The Pokémon would work for most of the week, and they could cover the entirety of Kanto. If there was a rocket base anywhere, they would find it, it's what they trained for. Ash was sat down on the top of one of the tallest skyscrapers in Celadon City. Just like his psychic Pokémon did with their minds, as he meditated he cast his aura out. He knew that Team Rocket had originally had a front based in Celadon, and he wanted to make sure that they hadn't set up there again. He thought it unlikely, but wanted to make sure. As he cast his mind out he realized that the city had developed a very rundown area on the outskirts. Looking over towards it, he realized that if Team Rocket wanted to find recruits, they would look there. Gesturing to Charizard who was resting behind him, Ash climbed onto his Pokémon's back once again and flew over to the slums. As he got close to the ground, Ash just slid off Charizard's back, returning the Pokémon as he dropped the last 10 feet. He landed on the edge of the slum, before striding in. As he reached what passed for an open area, he stepped over to a small street stand. In the process of a short conversation with the owner, Ash determined that the reason for the area being so run down. Gym leaders were the closest thing that many cities had to mayors, and the fact that money had been withdrawn from infrastructure projects had caused many people to lose their jobs. The person who had withdrawn it, Erica. She had apparently taken money away from the project to expand the sewer network over the entire city to turn it towards making the upper-class districts look prettier, the biggest cost being flowers. Ash took a small piece of paper from his pocket, and wrote a message on it. He released Charizard stowing the Pokeball into a pocket hidden inside his jacket, instead of his belt, before passing him the message, and muttering a command in his ear. Charizard flew into the sky, heading straight for the Celadon gym. Ash turned back to the stall owner, thanked him, and gave him some money for his time. The owner thanked him, not realizing who he had talked to. Striding through the rest of the district, Ash was still watching for a sign of Team Rocket. After a while, he found a rundown building, which made him suspicious. It seemed to go back some way, as if there was something being run in the back as well as the front. Stepping through the door, he found 2 men sat behind a desk. Aware of the lack of Pokeballs at his waist, Ash went up to the desk and waited. One of the men gave him a quick appraisal as he approached. Ash looked intimidating, with his cloak over his shoulders, but not quite disguising his athlete's physique, the lack of emotion on his face and the hat covering his eyes. The man clearly didn't want to mess with him. "What do you want?" the man behind the desk asked. "I'm looking for a job," Ash said. "That's what we do here." The man responded with a small grin, relaxing slightly. What kind of job? Ash felt a flash of triumph as his instinct was right. Leaning confidentially across the desk, he continued. I'm fed up of being exploited, if you know what I mean. I'm looking for something different, and I hear you know the right people. The man leaned back, before giving Ash a more detailed look, particularly noting the lack of pokeballs. He looked across at his partner, who nodded back. Standing up, the man gestured for Ash to follow him through to the back. As they got there, the man locked the door behind them and flicked a light on. They were in a large room with lockers along the wall on one side and shelves along the other, and an open space in the middle as if for exercise. At the back was a group of beds. Ash took it all in, quickly turning his attention to directly in front of him. There was a semicircle of 5 men facing him, each of them holding a pair of pokeballs. Each of them had a large red R splashed across their chest. Ash turned to face the man who had brought him through. These men saw you when you came in and approve. They would like to extend an offer to you to join Team Rocket. You'll be given Pokémon, taught different skills, and be a vital part of the team, the man told him. Ash didn't say anything. He turned back to the 5 rockets in front of him, evaluating them. They looked confident, but not excessively. They were wary, knowing that this was the most vulnerable point of the operation. Ash turned back to the man who had brought him through, opened his mouth and said one word. No. As the rockets registered he had spoken, Ash was already gone, his aura making him move quicker than they could follow. 3 rockets were down before any of them even moved, but the others started to release their Pokémon on instinct. Only one of them made it, the other was sent skidding across the floor by a blow to his chest. As Ash arced back to hit the last one, a force hit him, taking him by surprise and stopping him. There was a Drowzee stood in front of him with Eradicate next to him. The Drowzee had just used Psychic and looked surprised that it hadn't done more to his target. The man who had brought him threw his own 2 Pokeballs, releasing an Arbok and a Golem. Ash stopped, watching the 2 men who seemed a lot more confident now that they had Pokémon with them. The rocket stepped forward. Give up. You won't get away from us now, you've got no Pokémon. Ash just looked at him and dropped to the floor. Behind him the garage door disintegrated and a huge plume of flame shot across the room, hitting all 4 of the Pokémon. As it stopped, Ash's 2 opponents stared in disbelief as all of their Pokémon were lying knocked out. Charizard landed behind them, looking pleased with himself as the flame hadn't hit anything but its target. Ash rose again, stepping forward. He gestured to Charizard, who used his wings to knock each of the men out cold, before picking up their Pokeballs and recalling the Rocket's Pokémon. Ash then took some rope from one of the lockers along the wall, and tied up the men. He then unlocked the door and stepped back through, grabbed the other man from behind the desk and hauled him into the back with the rest. Quickly tying them up, Ash nodded to Charizard whilst passing him another note. The flame Pokémon flew back out through the door, the note clutched in his claw, heading straight for the police station. Whilst his Pokémon was gone, Ash began to search the room, working his way through the lockers and shelves. Eventually he found what he was looking for, where they sent recruits. It was in a remote area beyond Lavender Town, an area filled with canyons. Apparently there was a training base there. As Officer Jenny arrived with a group of police officers to arrest the rockets that he had discovered, Ash began to plan his assault on the base.